Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB Newsday with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria De Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christie's. I'm not here to mess around. With all the biggest topics and guests, you will always be up to date. GB Newsday and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and tune-in apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me! And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Very warm welcome to GB Newsday with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria De Piero. And that's a wrap for Conservative Party conference. Prime Minister finished speaking about half an hour ago.
But of course, that keynote speech interrupted by Greenpeace protesters. They unfurled this banner in the conference stating or asking who voted for this.
Yes.
Well, clearly a lot of the other people in the hall did.
The disruption came midway through a speech where the Prime Minister had declared that she was the person to get Britain moving and argued that her tax cuts were needed to get the economy growing and to level up the country.
Yes, I think they were escorted out, is the phrase that we use there. Perhaps we'll reflect on the... Well, some may say that. We'll be asking if we can get to those protesters how they wanted to get their voice across. But, of course, inside the hall, the Prime Minister ending her speech by declaring that she was ready to make hard choices, that the status quo was no longer an option and that her mission, although tough, was necessary.
We will be analysing and getting reaction to this speech throughout today's programme. We'd love to hear from you as ever. Before that is the latest news with Rosie.
Good afternoon. Just 1 minute past 12. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date today. Protesters have disrupted the Prime Minister's first Conservative conference speech as party leader.
Let's get them removed.
It was Liz Truss who said, let's get them removed. Those two Greenpeace demonstrators were quickly escorted from the hall after waving a flag which said, who voted for this? Well, Conservative members responded by applauding Liz Truss to show their support. Well, she then went to reassure the party that both she and the Chancellor are in complete lockstep with each other on the plan to get the economy growing.
I have three priorities for our economy: growth, growth and growth. Growth means more money in people's pockets. It means businesses creating new jobs. Growth means people can feel secure and they can plan for their future. Fundamentally, growth helps people fulfil their hopes and their dreams. And that's why our dynamic new Chancellor and I will be taking action in three areas.
There's more travel disruption for rail passengers today. ASLEF and TSSA union members are striking over pay, jobs and conditions. They're affecting services across the country. The ASLEF General Secretary Mick Whelan says industrial action will continue until the government intervenes. A man who entered the grounds of Windsor Castle with a crossbow on Christmas Day has appeared in court on charges of treason and making threats to kill the Queen. Charles Wansing Charlie is also charged with possession of an offensive weapon. Prosecutors said there was a potential to cause serious or fatal injuries. The late Queen had been in residence in the castle at the time. The 21-year-old will face trial in March next year. A 23-year-old Irishman has been killed whilst fighting in Ukraine. Rory Mason from County Meath had been engaged in a battle near the Russian border. His father, Rob, said the family was enormously proud of his courage, determination and selflessness by enlisting to support the country. Now, the Russian President Putin has signed a law legalising the so-called annexation of 4 Ukrainian regions. Now, that's according to Russian media. The European Parliament President has said that sham referendums would not change the status of these areas, who remain part of an independent Ukraine. On the ground, Ukraine continues to make gains in offensive operations along both the northeastern and southern fronts. The Professor of International Politics, Scott Lucas, says Putin's losing the war.
It means that everything since February that Putin tried to accomplish is now being undone, compounded by problems within Russia that we can discuss. But secondly, Ukraine now is on the verge of being able to move into territory that the Russians have controlled since 2014 through their proxies. That includes what we call the Donbass region in the east, and it includes Crimea, this big peninsula that Putin just seized, that he just annexed, without really a fight back from anyone.
Well, member of the Ukrainian parliament, Alexei Goncharo, says Putin could consider using nuclear weapons if he's desperate.
Because on every possible crossroad, Putin chooses the worst possible track. And if he will continue to do this, we are moving to the possibility that he could be so desperate that he can realistically consider this option. And that's why we need to act now to prevent it.
The EU will use satellites to try to prevent attacks on energy infrastructure. The Commissioner, Ursula von der Leyen, says recent acts of sabotage against the Nord Stream gas pipelines show how vulnerable the energy infrastructure is and that it needs protecting. Von der Leyen says it's in the interest of all Europeans to heighten security.
We will make best use of our satellite surveillance capacity. We have these satellites in place. We have the capacity to do the surveillance, to detect potential threats. So this is also a matter of prevention and awareness.
Police forces across England and Wales have agreed to send an officer to every home burglary. It's part of a new set of measures to ensure more crimes are being solved and more offenders prosecuted. The National Police Chiefs Council said chief constables will work to ensure the approach is implemented as soon as practically possible. You're now up to date on GB News. I'll bring you more as it develops. Now, let's head back to Newsday.
Rosie, thanks very much indeed. So, the Prime Minister promising that her government will be fiscally responsible, and during that keynote speech at the Conservative Party conference, indeed a strident speech, some may say, Liz Truss saying she was determined to get Britain moving during these tough times.
The promise has come after a difficult conference with attacks between cabinet members and accusations of coups over the Chancellor's mini-budget. And today the chaos continued when the Prime Minister's speech was interrupted by Greenpeace campaigners holding a banner stating who voted for this.
Well, plenty in the hall had voted for it, of course. Let's get the views of our political editor, Darren McCaffrey, and our political correspondent, Tom Harwood, who've been following today's events in Birmingham. Darren, first, I think if we can speak to you, it was obviously a keynote moment for her to actually settle the nerves and steady the ship. Did it actually do that, do you think?
Yeah, let's be honest about all of this. The Prime Minister has had, Mark, an incredibly difficult first month. And it only got worse, frankly. Let's be honest as well. When it started this conference on Sunday, almost every successive day, things seemed to fall apart, whether there was that U-turn on the 45p pence cut, or whether it was yesterday, the breakdown effectively of discipline within the party, even within the cabinet, quite extraordinarily. So today was a moment for the Prime Minister to try and reset things, to try and set out her stall, tell a personal story, but also to frankly try and get a grip again of the party. Now, did I think she did a pretty good job? In many ways, she did. She is setting up a narrative here that could be very, very effective, that she is someone who's going to be on the side of the grafters, the people who go to work every day, the people who generate growth for Britain, and that she wants to further encourage them and everyone else to try and grow Britain. And she is, and would take on the Greenpeace protesters and everyone else in the kind of what she would brand anti-growth agenda. And that is a dynamic, and I think that could really well be quite effective. And it was really interesting. You talked there about fiscal responsibility. She was very keen to note that, wasn't she, given what's happened with the markets, and given the fact that we haven't had any OBR forecasts, to say that she will run a government of sound money. All I would add, though, is that, you know, she hasn't got the personal kind of eccentric charisma of Boris Johnson. She's not as good an orator as Tony Blair. It was still a pretty good speech. It was enthusiastically welcomed in the hall. Is this enough, though, to change the minds of people inside and outside the party who are now against her? I'm not entirely sure it was, but it was a speech that was true to what Liz Truss really genuinely believes in, that she thinks the status quo is not working. She wants to change, deregulate, cut taxes to try and spur on growth, and she is going to stick at the moment to that path. The big question is, will the party allow her to do it?
Tom, they absolutely loved it in the hall, but there is no doubt that the tensions in the Conservative Party are not just simmering underneath, they are simmering overtly and in public. How do you put a stop to that? How does she put a stop to it? Is it possible to put a stop to it when, at the beginning of a premiership, people feel that they can be so outspoken?
Yeah, there's a couple of schools of thought here, I suppose. On the one hand, there was not a lot of party discipline under the last administration. Some might say that the 2019 intake, given how they were incubated into Parliament there for a month or two until lockdown fell upon the country, not the normal way that you would sort of be introduced to the whipping system, the normal way of introduced to that sort of party discipline never really came about in this Parliament with all of these new MPs. There are over 100 Conservative MPs who first got elected in 2019. Now the question is it possible to have traditional party discipline given the way that this intake had been incubated? A couple of schools of thought on that, of course, but clearly it's not been a particularly easy journey for the Prime Minister, and some might say the Prime Minister has not made things particularly easy for herself over the last few days. But it must be said, in all that she could have done with this speech today, I think it's fair to say that she did. Now, as Darren was rightly saying earlier, this is not a big changing moment. This does not mean that she's absolutely out of the rocky waters, that she's in the clear, that everything's going to be smooth sailing. Of course, the party's still very much in the schools, but for that speech, I think in some ways Liz Truss was able to confound some expectations. She's often referred to as relatively wooden in performance. She herself has said on many occasions she's not the most charismatic performer, and yet the way that she responded to those protesters with ad-libbing lines and indeed referring back to it later in the speech showed a bit more perhaps humanity, perhaps dynamism than many people might have expected. I think to some extent those two Greenpeace protesters were the best thing that could have possibly happened to Liz Truss. They gave her a gift, uniting the room behind her and demonstrating the very anti-growth coalition that she very much wanted to talk about. This is going to be a big, big theme of the narrative of this government in the coming days, weeks and months, how the country has been held back by so many different vested interests who've stopped us building, stopped us declaring energy independence, stopped us cutting taxes, stopped the country in so many different ways, wherever it might be. The anti-growth coalition argument could be a very powerful line, and it was so ably demonstrated there by those two protesters.
Just to pick up on just what Tom was saying, though, the problem, I think, for the Prime Minister is that some of those anti-growth people, Mark and Gloria, are inside the Conservative Party, and they're still there. I mean, house building, very good example. You know, there are a lot of NIMBY Conservatives up and down the country. Boris Johnson tried to change planning laws and met a wall of opposition. And that is the problem for the Prime Minister, is that actually at almost every turn, trying to achieve this growth, trying to achieve this deregulation, will mean that she will come up against opposition, like Greenpeace and other people, like Labour, but also she will come up against people inside the party who frankly do not like her either. And that's why it's going to be tricky. The one thing I would also, though, add, and you can tell this today, and I've actually spent quite a lot of time with the Prime Minister this week, you know what, there is no sign of the burden of office on Liz Truss. She was enjoying that speech today, and actually it's quite remarkable. You know, lots of politicians under the incredible pressure that she is under, you know, you could see it with Theresa May almost weigh on her. Liz Truss actually seems to be relishing this. She really seems to be enjoying it despite those difficulties.
Yeah, I had the chance to have a chat to her a couple of nights ago, and I really did get the sense that this was not someone who I suppose you wouldn't have thought this is someone who's been through the days that she has been through. That's a really astute observation, because Liz Truss really does seem to be perhaps peculiarly enjoying the role, and perhaps that's normal for a Prime Minister. I mean, it's quite a good job to have, despite the burdens of office, but it does seem that Liz Truss is trying to make the most of it.
Yeah, the perks aren't too bad, are they? Gentlemen, for the moment, thank you for that. As the music said, we'll be moving on up now to other matters, but back to you a little later.
I wouldn't do that job for all the tea in China, would
Wouldn't you?
No, not for all. Would you at home?
Yeah, good. Well, they've got this TV programme, actually, haven't they? Where they're making people the Prime Minister for the day.
But not actually.
It doesn't seem to be working that well from what I've seen in the clip. So, yeah, not the easiest job in the world, perhaps. Indeed, but with all those U-turns on economic policy that we've been seeing, we've been asking some Conservative supporters if they miss a certain Boris Johnson as Prime Minister.
And actually, a few of the delegates at the conference told me that they did. Well, our London reporter, Alice Porter, is in Uxbridge and South Ruislip, which is Boris Johnson's constituency. Alice is there for us now. How much love for there is there for Boris in his own backyard? It's too much alliteration.
Good afternoon. Well, I have been here so many times over the last 6 months speaking to people about Boris Johnson, where there's been various shenanigans going on in Westminster with Partygate and things like that. And I have to say, my impression has been that there continues to be a huge degree of loyalty in Boris Johnson's constituency towards Boris Johnson. And we're seeing, particularly between the two Prime Ministers, very different styles. Certainly, judging by Liz Truss's speech, they're very different in terms of their sort of delivery on speeches. I think it's fair to say Boris Johnson is obviously perhaps a much more natural orator, but in terms of their policies, we're also seeing different approaches as well. I mean, in terms of the national insurance hike that Boris Johnson had brought in, of course, in the mini budget, we saw Liz Truss rowing back on that. And then this sort of issue that's been a real problem for Liz Truss in the Tory party conference in Birmingham at the moment is this issue of whether benefits will rise in line with inflation, something that Boris Johnson had announced that was going to be made permanent. So we've got two very different Prime Ministers, two different policies. And when it comes to Conservative voters, I think we're seeing some people who do miss Boris Johnson and aren't necessarily aligned with someone who they, of course, didn't vote for. I've been out and about speaking with people about the two Prime Ministers, and this is what they had to say.
I wish they hadn't pushed Boris out. I think he's hit the ground running from day one, and he hasn't really been given a chance to actually just be Prime Minister without all this Brexit and COVID and everything else in Ukraine. So I hope he gets a chance to have another go.
I think she's really reliant on her cabinet. I do miss Boris Johnson. He had a lot more support behind him.
Don't basically miss Boris Johnson. I don't think Liz is doing a better job. Because already, I think as soon as she came, what they're saying, I think in billions we're in debt already as soon as she came in. I think she's trying to help, but I don't think she's going to last for long.
Yeah, he did a few things wrong, and a lot of people but he did a lot of things right. And yes, I miss him a lot.
What do you dislike about what Liz Truss is doing at the moment?
I think she's for the rich and not for your middle-class people.
He's been sacked from every job he's ever had for lying. And although I think that from an integrity perspective, Liz Truss probably isn't like that, I don't think she's the right person to lead the country.
Do you think Uxbridge and South Ruislip could vote Labour in the next election?
I think that there are very many places in the country, including here, that would absolutely have a bigger turnaround.
The thoughts of some people in Uxbridge speaking to me, and I think that last woman raised a really interesting point about what could happen to some of these supposedly safe Tory seats in the next general election, which is only about 18 months away. And if we look at the latest polling, if we look at, say, YouGov, they were showing that Labour have got a significant lead ahead of the Tories. And with this cost of living crisis continuing to be such a big issue for so many people, it'll be interesting to see in the next election whether this seat and others around the country are quite so safe for the Conservatives.
As ever, for bringing us the views from Boris Johnson's constituency.
Yeah. Alice Porter, our official Uxbridge correspondent there. She'll be back again, no doubt. Now, let's cross back, though, to Birmingham, to the Tory party conference, which has just wrapped up with that keynote speech. Brendan Clark-Smith, Conservative MP and Parliamentary Secretary to Cabinet Office, joining us from there now. Thanks very much for joining us so quickly after the speech. I tried to write down how many times she said growth, and I failed because there were quite a few of them. But it is a well-rehearsed message. There were no more rabbits out of the hat, as we remember from the Chancellor's speech. I mean, have they got their fingers burnt a little bit? They're going to be a bit more cautious now?
Well, it's growth and delivery. It's the same message, I would say. And you saw how long it took for the Prime Minister to get going because people were still on their feet, were still clapping. And people ask about the support, what's the mood at this conference? I think that was a good sign of exactly how supportive people are. You know, people actually believe in this. There's a nice personal touch there. The story I can really relate to with the comprehensive school and looking after your family and looking at bills and what we're going to do about that. And for me, that was that positive vision we were actually waiting for and that we actually really wanted to give us a lift at the conference, and I think the Prime Minister did that.
Brendan, good to see you as ever on the show. Since you mentioned her point about being the first Prime Minister that went to a comprehensive, I don't think that's true. I think actually Gordon Brown also went to a comprehensive, but we're going to park that. If she is so proud of going to a comprehensive, why on earth does she want to have more grammar schools?
Well, it's about raising opportunities. That's a good question, Gloria. It's about choice, isn't it? And as Conservatives, I think one of the reasons that I got into politics, we want to give people those choices and what is right for them. And it's about giving those opportunities. We're talking about, helping women into the workplace. It's our third female Prime Minister now, but we just look at it as opportunity for everybody. We had Nadim Zahawi was on before talking about a similar thing with his experiences, and we want to continue those opportunities, but you can't do that if you don't have a functioning economy, if you don't have that growth, and of course if you're paying £6,000 a year in your energy bills. So we've dealt with all of those. We put that positive vision through. I think during the speech as well there's a really nice bit of ad-libbing and some good humour from the Prime Minister as well with the protesters. So I think we've got something really good that we can build on now.
The phrase was status quo is not an option. I mean, obviously the problem for her is that there are many backbenchers feeling the same about her, that they want change already. How much of a job have the whips got to do now when you all get back to Parliament and people actually digest what's gone on these past 2 weeks?
Well, it's very difficult over the summer, and I think whenever you change your leader, you just did a feature about Boris Johnson as well, who's very, very popular with the Republican Party members there. And I think Liz's message, the Prime Minister, she was always about that party unity, about bringing people together. And, OK, you want your colleagues to fall in line and to actually do that. And I think people are very supportive. We want to bring those people with us. We've shown this last week with the Chancellor, that he is prepared to listen to colleagues as well. And that's what we're doing, because we will only win that election, we'll only get that growth, that delivery, if we go forward together united. You do that by listening to colleagues, showing that their opinions are valued, and of course if you actually deliver for the country.
Is Liz Truss the party's greatest asset? Those words came from Jake Berry, the party chairman, this morning.
I think so. I was a big supporter, supported from the first round. I supported a Prime Minister before as well. As you said, there's a bit of a change of direction. A lot of those traditional Conservative principles, I think that a lot of us are very keen on, about low tax, about growing the economy, about opportunity, and they're the kind of things that we actually really want to hear. So there's the positivity there. Again, as I said, a bit of good humour there. I think the public will be warming to that. So I can look at the opinion polls. The only polls that really actually count are the ones on election day. That's going to be a couple of years away now. There's plenty of chance, I think, for us to turn this round and to show the public that we're actually getting on with the job and delivering what they want to see.
However, one of those things that you've got to get on with is obviously trying to settle this row about benefits and whether they rise by inflation or by the wage figures. And clearly there's a huge number of people out there very worried. We didn't hear a word about this in the conference speech.
Well, I think we did, but in a slightly different way. And I think the main thing is there that we want to support people. We want people to be able to pay their bills, pay their mortgages, heat their homes and so on. Now, you can talk about benefits, and if you just assume it's all people who are not working and so on, and we want to fill those million-odd jobs, and we want people to get well-paid employment with good hours so they don't have that problem in the first place. But, of course, not everybody on universal credit's in that situation. We have carers, we have people with disabilities, people who can only work part-time, and we want to be fair to them. But what I'd say about uplifting and the rating of benefits in line with inflation, if you look at their energy bills that were going to go up, even if you'd done that, it wouldn't have touched the sides. It wouldn't have actually paid for anywhere near that. So actually, when we targeted things specifically, and the most vulnerable households are getting £1,200 rather than the £400, that's actually more than the inflationary increase would have actually been. So I think it's about the whole package and supporting people rather than just specifically the benefit. But I think what we all agree on is that we want to support people, and we're a compassionate party. Colleagues care about that a lot, and party conference, of course, is a great place to have these discussions.
Brendan, thank you very much indeed for joining us and bringing us your reaction so quickly after the speech. Much appreciated. Thank you.
Coming up, Britain goes off the rails again as 9,000 train drivers stage their latest round of strike action. We'll be speaking to GB News reporters around the country this afternoon, and shortly we're heading to Leeds to get a reaction there.
And still in Birmingham too, getting reaction to that speech from Conservative MP Steve Baker. I bet he's got something to say.
Minister, no less.
Well, yes, I do beg his pardon. But clearly he's obviously been a great Truss supporter. We'll see what he's going to mark her out of 10, maybe.
All that after the break.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB Newsday with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria De Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around with all the biggest topics and guests. You will always be up to date. GB Newsday and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Back in Birmingham now, and we can talk to the Northern Ireland Minister, Steve Baker. Steve, always a pleasure to have you on the show and on the channel. There doesn't seem to be much collective responsibility in your party. Penny Mordaunt, who's in the Cabinet, said... Oh, Steve, are we struggling with your sound? Can you hear us okay? Because I think... Oh, we...
Yes, I can.
Oh, perfect. So Penny Mordaunt, who is in the Cabinet, went on the airwaves and said... that benefits should rise in line with prices. That is not government policy. Should she be fired?
Well, that's really a decision for the Prime Minister, if I may say so. Look, at the mood I'm in at the moment, I'm extremely happy with the speech that Liz Truss has made. At last, after 30 years, we've got a Prime Minister with an absolutely sincere and steadfast commitment to prosperity through freedom. I mean, it's such a relief. I'm extremely pleased. And now I hope all Conservative MPs, whether they're in the Cabinet or on the backbenches, will decide that this is what they want and get behind the Prime Minister.
The word was status quo is not an option. Growth, as I was saying, I tried to jot down how many times she mentioned that word. I failed. But clearly there is another side of this, and that is a lot of your MPs are worried about the situation on benefits, whether it's linked to inflation, how high inflation goes as well. She didn't address any of that in the speech in detail.
Well, no, she didn't. But look, the reality is, with inflation at levels where it is, it's a very grave problem for everyone, for businesses, for households, for individuals, and yes, for government, for the NHS. I mean, our fire service just had a big boost to funding, and it's been eaten up by energy bills. You know, it is an extremely serious situation. So I don't want to second-guess decisions which are very tough to take with big trade-offs. But, you know, people will know I've got a long record of saying that the universal credit uplift should be kept. I want a safety net that works, plus freedom so that people can get on and live their lives. And what the Prime Minister's talking about is that spirit of freedom. I mean, she doesn't care about 2-for-1 offers. Hallelujah. People are going to have the space to be responsible, make their own choices and build their own lives. And of course, responsibility and freedom is quite risky, but it is the essence of being human. And that's why I'm so excited about the speech she's made today. If only Tory MPs would get behind her, we could do something great.
Well, Jake Berry, the Tory chairman, said Liz Truss is the party's greatest asset. Sounds like you agree. Just tell me why.
She's a great asset because at last she's put some intellectual keel on the ship of state. You know, politics is always going to be difficult. It's always going to be contested. There will always be people trying to bring us down. So the ship of state is always going to be in a storm. And in that storm, you need a bit of keel to keep you on course. And that's been, I think, lacking time and again, unfortunately. But that is right there with Liz. She knows what she believes. She knows why she believes it. And she's very clearly going to see it through. Look at the mood she was in today. Look at how she handled the protester. I mean, there's resolve, there's intellect, there's agility. This is a person absolutely ready to be a great Prime Minister committed to freedom. And of course, reform's going to be tough. So I'm really excited about backing her. I'm glad that I backed her for the leadership. It's a proud day.
Without being too unkind about it, Steve, I mean, were you and others taken aback at how she actually managed to deliver this speech?
Taken aback? No, not at all. She's the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. You don't get to be Prime Minister of the UK without being able to make a speech. Now, I thought actually today what you started to see was Liz's human side, something which people like me have long seen. Of course, I've known her for 12 years since we were both elected. I've always known she had a sense of humour, and that started to come across today. Look, those protesters, you know, they weren't welcome. We all started clapping to drown them out. The way she dealt with them was to say that they'd come too early into the studio because she was into the theatre because she was about to deal with the anti-growth coalition, and the way she landed it was perfect to deal with a heckler like that.
Steve, let me just ask you, because she walked onto the stage with "Moving On Up" by M People, very positive song.
Yeah.
M People founder Mike Pickering has said the band are livid that their song was used by Prime Minister Liz Truss on stage. Your reaction?
Well, I mean, if they're going to licence their music for use by others, I'm afraid that's a choice they've made. And provided the licensing arrangements were complied with, I'm afraid they'd surrendered that right to object. I'm afraid that's, if you enter into contracts, you have to abide by them. I mean, they're entitled to their political views, but, you know, I'm afraid I don't have much sympathy. If you licence your music to be used by somebody else, then you should expect it to be used.
So you won't be using it again?
I don't care whether she uses it again or not. It's not material to the prospects of the people in Wickham or Northern Ireland, and that's what I'm focused on. You know, we need to deliver freedom. We need to
unless they want to move on up, maybe. I don't know. But let me just bring you what Rachel Reeves said, the Shadow Chancellor, basically said Labour knows real growth comes from the contribution of millions of working people and thousands of businesses. Most important thing the Prime Minister can do right now to stabilise the economy is immediately reverse her government's kamikaze budget when Parliament returns next week. Now, given that, what do you expect to return when you get back to Parliament and the whips have a word with all of you? Will there be a reassessment of some of these financial measures?
No. I mean, Rachel Reeves has just engaged in mere politics there. The truth is that it's the Conservative Party that understands that society is cooperation. It's millions of businesses and individuals making choices, working, serving one another. I mean, this is the essence of a free society. The idea that Labour embodies it is a joke. I mean, Labour's answer to everything is more coercion, more force, more taxation, more regulation. So, I mean, I think that Rachel's engaged in mere politics there, and I have no truck with it. I'm expecting when we get back that Tory MPs will have taken stock of an exceptionally good speech. They'll have taken stock of what they're trying to achieve. They'll have had the opportunity to hear from their members and their party chairman and so on locally when they get to their constituencies. And I hope they'll decide to try and be, if I may say so, a bit statesmanlike, and that means looking like people who want to govern a country of tens of millions in the general interest by going for prosperity through freedom. And I think it's time for everyone, as it were, to rise to the challenge of the moment, and that means being serious and not shooting their mouths off against this policy.
Very clear. Thank you very much indeed for joining us, Northern Ireland Minister Steve Baker there.
Let him move on up now. Yes, we might try and get in touch with them people and see exactly what's annoyed them about the song being used, but well spotted. I seem to think there's other political parties who become unstuck when they've used rock songs without sort of asking for, not permission, because as Steve was saying, if you pay the music performance
just when David Cameron, he loves the Smiths, and they were cross that he loved the Smiths. Anyway, look, the cost of living crisis continues to impact households across the UK. We'll be hearing from the boss of Iceland, one of the UK's supermarkets.
Also, the rail strikes continuing to cause disruption across the country. More reaction to the speech too from the party conference in Birmingham. But first, let's get an update on the news headlines with Rosie.
Good afternoon, 12:34. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date today. Protesters have disrupted the Prime Minister's first Conservative conference speech as party leader.
Let's get them removed.
You can hear Liz Truss there say, let's get them removed. It was two Greenpeace demonstrators who were quickly escorted from the hall after waving a flag which said, "Who voted for this?" Conservative members responded by applauding Liz Truss to show their support. Well, she then went on to reassure the party that both she and the Chancellor are in complete lockstep with each other on the plan to get the economy growing.
I have three priorities for our economy: growth, growth, and growth. Growth means more money in people's pockets. It means businesses creating new jobs. Growth means people can feel secure and they can plan for their future. Fundamentally, growth helps people fulfil their hopes and their dreams. And that's why our dynamic new Chancellor and I will be taking action in three areas.
Irishman Rory Mason's been killed while fighting for Ukraine's International Legion near the Russian border. The 23-year-old's father said his family is enormously proud of his courage, determination and selflessness by enlisting to support the country. There's more travel disruption for rail passengers today. ASLEF and TSSA union members are again striking over pay, jobs and conditions. That's had a massive impact across the services around the country. The ASLEF General Secretary Mick Whelan says the industrial action will continue until the government intervenes. We're on your TV, online and DAB+ radio. This is GB News. Don't go anywhere. Newsday will be back in a moment.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB Newsday with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria De Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around. With all the biggest topics and guests, you will always be up to date. GB Newsday and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Welcome to GB Newsday. The time is 12:38. Now, a key theme in the Prime Minister's conference speech a little earlier was the idea of an anti-growth coalition opposing her economic plans, involving opposition parties, trade unions and activists. Well, leader of the Train Drivers Union, Mick Lynch, has described that as barking mad.
Close quotes. But it does come on the day, of course, that passengers are facing yet more travel disruption. Plenty of them pretty mad, with their working lives turned upside down once more. The latest strike in this long-running dispute over pay, jobs and conditions. Today, thousands of workers from ASLEF and the Transport Salary Staff Association joining the walkout, causing some cancellations across parts of the network, not all of it, of course.
Joining us now from Leeds Station is our Yorkshire and Humber reporter. Anna, what is the mood like? It looks incredibly quiet where you are. Have you been able to speak to anybody?
Good afternoon. Yes, I've been out on the picket line for ASLEF. They're the ones who are here. And that's the train drivers union with over 21,000 members. Their mood is very resolute, and they're saying, you know, we're going to stay here, we're going to keep striking until we get an increase in pay. That's their main concern. They're saying as inflation is rising, their wages haven't risen with inflation, and they're saying they're struggling to keep up with the cost of living because of that. And yes, it is incredibly quiet. There's only a very limited number of trains running here today. Passengers have been turning up, trying to get to work, trying to go about their normal commute, and either the train isn't running, it's been delayed, and they're having to find alternate sources of transport to get about their daily lives. Now, I've been speaking to some passengers here in the train station about how the strikes impacted them today and what they think to the strikes, and this is what they had to say.
Well, basically, it's making me be late for work today. Looking for other options to arrive to work on time, but anyways, we're just going to make it. So
I want to believe that the Network Rail is a private, organization, and of course, going on strike today, how much the organization will lose today, and that's not going to be recoverable.
Too much money is held back from people that work on the trains. There's too much going on with the providers of the services, so like the ones that oversee Network Rail. So yeah, I think they're a good thing. I think they need to. It's difficult. I've got a flat tyre and I could really use getting somewhere else. So it's difficult and it's very annoying, but I support it still. I get it.
I think it's really important for people to make sure their voice is heard, and strikes are a fantastic way to do that, especially on this sort of scale.
I feel like train drivers do have a hard job, like people, they kill themselves, there'll be like suicides, and it must affect them mentally, but it is still hard for the normal public that need to get trains. I think
So it's been a mixed response from passengers here. The majority of them have been supporting the strike action. But as these strikes rumble on, will public opinion still feel the same way? Will people still be supporting workers on the rail as they fight for pay and increased conditions? And it's not just today where services are going to be held up. Again, looking ahead to Saturday, that's when the RMT are coming out in force, with over 40,000 of their members going on strike, which will severely impact on services across the country.
Anna, thank you. Thanks very much indeed.
Well, joining us in the studio now, Simon Calder, travel correspondent at The Independent, the only man that can get anywhere in a rail strike. You've done it again.
Well,
welcome.
Look, that's very kind. I have been cycling around the terminus stations of London, but actually, half of them you wouldn't know that there's anything going on. So, for example, if you go to Britain's busiest railway station, London Waterloo, South Western Railway is running a normal service. It's only if you then try and change trains to South Eastern,
which is me,
Waterloo East, you suddenly find that's all locked up. Similar story at London Charing Cross. You go to King's Cross, which is the other end of the line from where Anna was in Leeds. That's really strange because you've got Grand Central running trains normally. LNER, which is the main operator, actually doing a train to Edinburgh every couple of hours. Fairly quiet from what I can see, not many passengers. And and also Great Northern running trains, but Hull trains, they had a departure cancelled. St Pancras, East Midlands Railway, no trains. South Eastern, no trains. Eurostar, absolutely normal. Thameslink.
Yeah, I was going to say, I got a Thameslink in this morning, empty train, and it arrived on time for once.
Yes.
So
no one likes to show off.
So, all right, OK. However, you've got, not quite breaking news, but news just arriving at Platform 1, shall we say.
Yes.
We've got a new Transport Secretary. What she's had to say?
OK, this is Anne-Marie Trevelyan. She took over from Grant Shapps.
Yeah.
Now, she has, since she began in the role as Transport Secretary, had meetings with Mick Whelan from the ASLEF Train Drivers Union and Mick Lynch from the RMT Union. And both of those, I've talked to them and say, yeah, we had a fairly cordial meeting. And therefore, they're very much hoping that she is going to be able to deliver well, in the case of the train drivers, it's just all about money.
Right.
And they just say, come on, give us a decent pay rise.
Yeah.
She has, in the past few minutes, tweeted a nice picture of what the Conservatives are doing for Britain, which includes more jobs and higher wages. So certainly the unions are picking up on that.
What sort of pay rise are the unions asking for? Now, of course, it's a negotiation, so what the headline figure is not necessarily what they expect to get, but just bring us up to date.
So the Transport Salaried Staff Association, which is taking some action today and all the way through to Saturday, as Anna said, we've got a huge national rail strike on Saturday.
Yeah.
They say they want to keep pace with inflation, which could be a double figures pay increase. But the RMT, I spoke to Mick Lynch and said, what do you want, 5, 7, 9%? He said, we're not even there yet. We're talking about ticket office closures. And interestingly, in her speech last night, the Transport Secretary said, we've really got to sort out ticket offices because most people aren't buying tickets from there. But it's less than a year since she was campaigning in her constituency for against a cut in booking office hours. So that's quite tricky. But talking to ASLEF, the Train Drivers Union, and their members on the picket lines across London, they are absolutely determined to get what they would call a decent settlement. They say they've been, 2% is being talked about. They would be looking for 7 perhaps, but it's likely to be dressed up as 5% and then 2-3% in productivity increase.
Right, and what is the position in terms of, obviously the train companies have said, look, we've been hit really badly by COVID, people stopped travelling, people were working from home, therefore the money's not there. But I have to say, the trains I've been on recently, they're pretty full. So is the situation changing that perhaps the traffic is coming through that might change the numbers?
Not really.
Right.
So there has been a recovery,
as
most certainly, but it's a different recovery. So the bedrock of rail finances used to be people commuting from Stevenage, from Basingstoke,
Peterborough,
from Basildon, Peterborough, anywhere, Reading into London, paying many thousands of pounds in advance for their annual season tickets. Those, you've lost about £2 billion. And while there is an increase in leisure travel at weekends, which is why, of course, most of the strikes are targeting weekends, it's nothing like making up for it. So it's a question of Well, do we get more money from the taxpayer? And everybody is bankrolling the railways at the moment.
The train companies,
They go nowhere near a train. Or do we get it from higher ticket prices? And those are the employers say those are the only two options. And therefore, if you're going to have a pay rise of 5, 7, 9%, you're going to have to deliver some productivity savings. But the unions will only do those in return for extracting significant
so it's a way to go,
Yes.
way to go. Simon, as ever, thank you for joining us. We'll let you get you back on the bike. Thank you very much indeed.
Well, just to get some more reaction now to Conservative Party conference, which is just wound up, but joining us now is Anna Firth, the Conservative MP for Southend West. Anna, great to have you on the show today. I put it to you that collective responsibility in your party is finished. It's over. How can you govern when so many people, senior people, including in the Cabinet, are shooting from the hip publicly about what sort of policies the government should be pursuing?
Well, that certainly isn't what we saw today in the hall. It was an incredibly well-received speech. The Prime Minister delivered and presented the speech extremely well. I thought she dealt with the protesters extremely well and showed that she can think on her feet. And we heard about the anti-growth coalition, you saw the cabinet lined up in front of the stage. I thought one of the interesting things was that the Prime Minister was very clear with the cabinet about the things that she wants them to deliver in the next 2 years. It was certainly a very, very well presented speech and a very united cabinet and a very united hall.
Question is it united country? And clearly there's a huge debate going on about benefits in particular and how they should be linked, whether that's to inflation, how much do you pay in that? As I've said to others, there was nothing in the speech about that, one of the key questions for backbenchers.
Well, this was about the Prime Minister setting out her vision for Britain and also showing us a little bit more about the person that she is. So, you know, she gave her headlines of growth, growth, growth. She articulated her Conservative argument about the pie and growing the pie and how if we don't grow the pie, then there's less to actually distribute. And I think that was very, very important. But we also saw a bit about who she is. And I think personally, I think it was very exciting to hear her childhood, the way the accent on education. It shows why she is so keen on education and opportunity. First Prime Minister that we've ever had coming from a comprehensive school. And that story that she told us about going to visit an airport or wherever it was where her brother was suggested that he would be a pilot and she would be an air stewardess. I mean, we got a real insight there into why she is so passionate about equality. And personally, I think that's encouraging and a very exciting programme for the country.
And there's been a Downing Street, the usual Downing Street sort of press spokesperson briefing where they talk to journalists about the messaging. Tory whips will seek to restore order over critical government ministers. That's from the Downing Street briefing, which has just finished. That's basically, you speak out, you're losing the whip.
Well, at the moment, I'm not clear what you're expecting me to speak out about. I mean, I've just listened to an incredibly positive vision for Britain, a direction in which I think we do need to go to pursue growth and to put the economy first. We also heard that we have very positive support for Ukraine. You will have noticed that got a massive standing ovation inside the hall. Yes, of course, there are going to be bumps and hiccups along the way. Yes, there are going to be challenges, but we have seen a Prime Minister who's already delivered on an incredible package of energy relief to help working people, to help normal people, and now she's set out her vision to make Britain, you know, invest in Britain. The investment zones programme, I think, is extremely positive, and this is a programme which was exciting to listen to. There was an exciting atmosphere in the hall, and there was certainly no no disunity. Obviously, we had the two clowns who came in and tried to disrupt everything. But you know, these things happen, don't they, at party conferences?
Do you believe they have a right to protest?
Yes, of course, I believe everybody has a right to protest. I do think there's a time and a place. But as it happened, the Prime Minister dealt with it brilliantly, and in a way it energised everybody, and everybody saw what they were trying to do. It's a bit of a cheap jibe. Everybody in that hall was 100% behind the Prime Minister, and she dealt with it brilliantly. The Anti-Growth Coalition.
Anna Firth, thank you very much. Yeah, thank you very much indeed for joining us there and bringing us your reaction to the conference. Thank you very much.
We will continue our coverage from conference, but actually our next guest is Richard Walker, who is the boss of the supermarket Iceland, who sees from the front line the cost of living crisis every day. Richard Walker, Managing Director at Iceland, thank you for joining us. Great to see you back on the channel. I wanted to ask you how you are seeing, in practical terms, the cost of living crisis. Is it people getting to the till and then saying, actually, I'm going to have to put stuff back when they get the bill? Is it people no longer buying things like meat, which are more expensive, milk? What's the practical day-to-day experience in your stores?
Yeah, hi there. Good to be back on. It's all of the above. We're seeing our value £1 ranges being more important than ever before to our core customer. That's why we've held the price of all of them to at least the end of this year. And actually, we've introduced over 100 new £1 lines in our chilled category as well, just to try and help support our customers. But then actually, our luxury ranges are doing well also, because we're seeing other customers trade down from more expensive supermarkets looking for value, and as opposed to spending 5, 6, 7 quid on a ready meal in M&S, they can buy a luxury ready meal with us for £3.50. So actually, it's quite interesting dynamic. We are also hearing those stories, as you referenced, of people leaving stuff in the trolley when they get to the till because they only have a certain budget, and also, shoplifting is on the rise as people are getting more desperate. So we're very much seeing it on the front lines in our 1,000 stores, 5 million customers a week. Very much a barometer of what's going on out there.
And Richard, you launched this Iceland Food Club with the charity Fair For You, with this sort of card where you could actually use that against the shopping. And I think you were telling us that the interest, for instance, on a £25 loan on that is only 40 pence. Are you going to be able to maintain that with what's happened to interest rates and what's likely to perhaps happen at the next Bank of England meeting in November?
Yes, we can absolutely maintain it. And in fact, applications are now about 60,000 since we launched it a month ago. So I think that shows just how important this initiative is. We're not charging any interest to our customers. We're paying the bill, but we can afford to do that. We also think it's the right thing to do for our customers, because it's not solely down to the government to help people through this cost of living crisis. I think business needs to step up and do what they can as well. And that's why things like the Iceland Food Club, these interest-free microloans, are so essential right now.
Yeah, and you launched that because you said a lot of people were embarrassed or even guilty about going to food banks to try and help their own families.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, there are gaps in income, especially as we come into the winter, where people need help to smooth those gaps. And there is obviously, for some people, a shame in going to food banks, and these aren't people who would normally go. But I think it's kind of testament to how tough it is out there and how struggling people are that they're being forced to do so. So we're happy to try and help them, and if we can keep them shopping with us, that's obviously a good thing.
And just a question about running a business like yours at a time of rising energy costs. You have to heat your stores, you have to keep the fridges on, the freezers on. What sort of financial impact is that having on you as the managing director? And is the government's plan for businesses in terms of helping you with your energy costs, have they done enough?
Look, it is undoubtedly tough. We quite rightly focus on consumers and the energy bills that they're facing, and certainly our customers are struggling with that. But of course, for business as well, and we have a lot of fridges and freezers, so our electricity bill is already very high. But of course, with the rise in energy prices, it was getting to a point where it was almost unmanageable. So the government bringing in an energy price cap for business is essential because, yes, it's unpalatably high, but actually at least it now gives us certainty so we can cash flow accordingly and we can restart our store opening programs and keep investing and planning and growing our business, which is obviously what we do best. So we're okay. You know, we've got deep cash reserves as a business. We'll get through it. But of course, it's a problem for every business. And therefore, the cap that the government has brought in for business is a godsend, quite frankly. And I think absolutely the right thing to do. Longer term, they need to fix our broken energy markets. All of our electricity is renewable. It's generated from wind and solar. And of course, the price of wind and solar has not increased at all. But because all of our electricity is set by the gas price, that's something that needs to be fixed longer term because we have a very strange price setting system that is obviously completely broken and needs to be sorted longer term.
Richard Walker, the Managing Director of Iceland, thank you very much indeed for your time and your thoughts. We appreciate them.
Well, thanks for being with us here on GB Newsday. Lots more reaction to come in these following 2 hours to the Liz Truss conference. But first, let's get a bit more coming in from Birmingham because we're now joined by Tom Hunt, Conservative MP for Ipswich, who's been listening to that conference speech. Tommy, we've just been discussing about both the context and the content. Big thumbs up, lots of claps for the way the speech was delivered, but still a repetition of that growth message. Nothing about whether benefits are going to be increased by inflation, for instance.
Well, I think what we've seen over the last couple of weeks has been a huge amount of policy, both the major intervention on energy, but also the growth plan last week. So I think we've had a lot of policy over the last few weeks. And I think the main thing about this speech was it gave the Prime Minister an opportunity to communicate those policies and why she's implementing those policies and some of the benefits associated with them. So I don't think any of us went into the conference today expecting a raft of new policies. What we were hoping for was good communication and a powerful vision for where the Prime Minister wants to take the country, and that's what we got. So, I mean, I was very pleased with the Prime Minister's speech. And I've actually spoken to some delegates outside who I've spoken to throughout the conference. A couple of days ago, they had a few concerns, spoken to them now. They're much more on board. So, yeah, I think she did a good job.
What are those concerns, then?
Well, I just think that I think when I spoke to them a couple of days ago, they were saying that they didn't quite understand aspects of the growth plan and, why it was so necessary. 2 of them came up to me afterwards and they said, her passion and her articulation of why growth is so important. And I think for me, it was that example she gave when she said growth isn't just numbers on a spreadsheet. It's people getting a higher paid job. It's security. It's being able to plan for the future. And it's being able to achieve their potential. And if they achieve their potential, our country achieves its potential. So I saw patriotism there, I saw passion there, and I saw emotion, and I thought that was a good thing. And I think that, I think the Prime Minister has every chance to unite the party behind where she wants to take us.
How worried are you about mortgage offers being cancelled, people having to pull out of buying their dream home or even have to sell their current home because they just can't keep up with those payments?
Well, I mean, clearly, rising interest rates is something that many people are going to be scared of. They're going to be concerned about, including myself, including many people I know. We're used to having interest rates at a certain level. It is a matter for the Bank of England to decide at what rate interest rates are set. But when we look at what's going on across the world, other countries are, we've seen interest rates go up quite significantly. We've got inflation at very high levels. So, yes, I think people are right to be concerned about interest rates potentially going up. But I think that the government is there to support people as much as it can.
MP for Ipswich, Conservative MP for Ipswich, Tom Hunt. Always a pleasure. Thank you.
Plenty more analysis reaction from Birmingham. Has the Prime Minister saved her premiership? We'll be asking those questions to plenty more people in a moment. First, latest news headlines with Rosie.
very good afternoon to you. Just 1 minute past 1. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date on GB News. Protesters disrupted the Prime Minister's first Conservative conference speech as party leader.
Let's get them removed.
That was the Prime Minister saying, let's get them removed. Well, 2 Greenpeace demonstrators were quickly escorted from the hall after waving a flag which said, "Who voted for this?" Conservative members responded by applauding Liz Truss to show their support. She then went on to reassure the party that both she and the Chancellor are in complete lockstep with each other on the plan to get the economy growing.
I have 3 priorities for our economy: growth, growth and growth. Growth means more money in people's pockets. It means businesses creating new jobs. Growth means people can feel secure and they can plan for their future. Fundamentally, growth helps people fulfil their hopes and their dreams. And that's why our dynamic new Chancellor and I will be taking action in 3 areas.
Well, Head of Public Affairs at Greenpeace, Rebecca Newsom, explained why they interrupted the Prime Minister's speech.
This year we really felt we needed to make an intervention because nobody actually voted for a lot of what Liz Truss and her government are trying to do at the moment. Nobody voted for fracking, nobody voted to cut benefits, nobody voted to trash nature, nobody voted to scrap workers' rights. There's a whole host of things that the Conservative government were elected to do in 2019 that they're simply not doing. And we needed to take that message and represent the public.
There's going to be more travel disruption for rail passengers today. ASLEF and TSSA union members are striking again over paid jobs and conditions, and that's had an impact on services across the country. The ASLEF General Secretary, Mick Whelan, says industrial action will continue until the government intervenes.
It's about the people you represent. They haven't had a pay rise for 3 years. Our employers are privateers. We don't work for the government. We don't work for the DfT. They seem to have done a rather corrupt deal with the government where they're not allowed to offer us a cost of living increase. So when we talk to our employers, they say you've got to talk to the government. And when we talk to the government, they say we've got to talk to our employers. After 3 years, our members have had enough.
Police forces across England and Wales have agreed to send an officer to every home burglary. It's part of a new set of measures to ensure that more crimes are being solved and more offenders prosecuted. The National Police Chiefs Council says chief constables will work to ensure the approach is implemented as soon as practically possible. A 23-year-old Irishman's been killed while fighting in Ukraine. Rory Mason from County Meath has been engaged in a battle near the Russian border. His father, Rob, said the family were enormously proud of his courage, determination and selflessness by enlisting to support the country. Well, the Russian President Putin has signed a law legalising the so-called annexation of 4 Ukrainian regions, according to Russian media. The European Parliament President said that sham referendums would not change the status of the areas, which remain independent part of Ukraine. On the ground, Ukraine continues to make gains in offensive operations along both northeastern and southern fronts. The EU are going to use satellites to try to prevent attacks on energy infrastructure. The Commissioner, Ursula von der Leyen, says the recent acts of sabotage against the Nord Stream gas pipelines show how vulnerable the energy infrastructure is and that it needs protecting. She says it's in the interest of all Europeans to heighten security.
We will make best use of our satellite surveillance capacity. We have these satellites in place. We have the capacity to do the surveillance, to detect potential threats. So this is also a matter of prevention and awareness.
A man who entered the grounds of Windsor Castle with a crossbow on Christmas Day has appeared in court on charges of treason and making threats to kill the Queen. Jaswant Singh Charlie is also charged with possession of an offensive weapon. Prosecutors said there was a potential to cause serious or fatal injuries. The late Queen had been in residence at the castle at the time. The 21-year-old will face trial in March next year. You're now up to date on GB News. I'll bring you more as it develops. Now, back to Newsday.
Thank you, Rose. It's 6 minutes past 1. The Prime Minister has today hit out at the anti-growth coalition, which she says is holding Britain back. Liz Truss told the Tory conference that MPs should trust her to do what it takes to push through a difficult but necessary agenda for growth.
Well, on stage in Birmingham here, she said that status quo not an option, that the government could not give in to the voices of decline. Let's have a listen and look at more of what she had to say.
As the last few weeks have shown, it will be difficult. Whenever there's change, there is disruption. And not everybody will be in favour of change, but everyone will benefit from the result. A growing economy and a better future. That is what we have a clear plan to deliver. I have 3 priorities for our economy: growth, growth, and growth. The fact is that the abolition of the 45p tax rate became a distraction from the major parts of our growth plan. That is why we're no longer proceeding with it. I get it, and I have listened. We are in tough times, but I want you to know that day in, day out, I'm thinking about how we get this country moving. I'm working flat out to make sure people can get through this crisis. So let me be clear, we have your back. I will not allow the anti-growth coalition to hold us back. Labour, the Lib Dems, the SNP, the militant unions, the vested interests dressed up as think tanks, the talking heads, the Brexit deniers, Extinction Rebellion, and some of the people we had in the hall earlier. The fact is, they prefer protesting to doing. They prefer talking on Twitter to taking tough decisions. They taxi from North London townhouses to the BBC studio to dismiss anyone challenging the status quo. From broadcast to podcast, they peddle the same old answers. It's always more taxes, more regulation, and more meddling. Wrong, wrong.
Well, wrong, I think was the other word. 3 of them, you seem to remember. Anyway, missed one out, never mind.
Joining us now is Charlie Rowley, who was until quite recently special advisor to that big beast at the Tory party, Michael Gove, when he was Secretary of State for Levelling Up. Of course, he is no longer in the Cabinet. What's he up to? He's been sniping a bit, hasn't he?
Well, good afternoon. And I think what Michael was setting out ahead of the Conservative Party conference was a view that was clearly held by a number of backbench MPs and his colleagues, and it was something that made the Prime Minister and the Chancellor take a different approach when it came to the 45p reduction to 40p in the top rate of income tax for the highest earners. It is no crime to want to cut taxes, which is what Kwasi and the Prime Minister Liz Truss wants to do. Every Conservative wants to cut taxes, including Michael, I would have thought. But the debate was only about when the time was right to do so. And as I say, it's no crime to cut tax. You can't fault the Prime Minister and the Chancellor for wanting to take that approach. But I think what Michael was pointing out, that perhaps the time may not be right at the moment. And the Prime Minister and the Chancellor have listened and made a change of turn.
Has the debate, however, moved on to the whole issue of inflation and therefore what that does to benefits and whether you link benefits to that? Penny Mordaunt, of course, has gone public with that. She didn't look too impressed in that cutaway with the audience. We couldn't see Michael Gove there. I mean, what's he likely to do? Team up with Penny Mordaunt and start plotting from the sidelines?
Well, I think Michael has been a cabinet minister for many, many years, and he knows just how difficult it will be when you have tough decisions to take. And as part of a cabinet collective responsibility, everybody has to be disciplined in terms of the messaging. And what we've seen, perhaps during this conference, is a debate take place in the public eye, which we'd rather see behind closed doors, but that debate will take place behind closed doors. No decision has been made. The cabinet will come together, and Penny is a brilliant cabinet minister. She was a brilliant defence secretary, and she was a fantastic minister when I worked with her in the cabinet office. And the whole cabinet will debate the issue of benefits and whether it should be increased in terms of inflation or wages. That will take place behind closed doors, and then it will be the Chancellor and the Prime Minister who makes that announcement when the time is right in due course, once a decision has been taken.
Why do you think it will take place behind closed doors? There's absolutely zero evidence of that this week. It's all been taking place on the airwaves, in fringe meetings.
Well, conferences are full of fringe events, and there are many events to speak at, and people will speak maybe slightly more freely because there'll be a number of issues that come up that you might not expect. But as a government, they will need to take a decision on this issue. And yes, we've heard in the margins cabinet ministers making their own views clear as to what should happen. But when the decision is actually taken, that needs to be debated before, and that will take place back in London around the cabinet table.
The Downing Street Prime Minister's press secretary says Tory whips will seek to restore order over critical government ministers. Collective responsibility is the same as it always has been. How big a job have those whips got when Parliament gets back to Westminster? And indeed, what do they do with Penny Mordaunt?
Well, you're absolutely right. It is a big task. Because the government has been in office for 12 years. It is a new Prime Minister, it is a new team, it is a new cabinet, and it's come into office after what has been a turbulent few days ahead of this conference. We are behind in the polls, and that's not a place that any Conservative supporter wants to be in. But you have to recognise that, and therefore there will be anxiety, and with that comes people who maybe a bit quick to say what they think without sort of understanding sort of how a team should play together in order to win and be as successful as it possibly can be. So the whips have a huge task on their hands, to be fair, and they will have to come together, but they have to ensure that the whole Conservative Party comes together, and members of Parliament have to recognise that the only way which the Conservative Party is going to win the next general election, the only way they're going to win the next general election is if they come together and get behind the Prime Minister, but have all of the debates, all of the policy disputes that may have been played out in the public eye this week. We have to ensure that those debates take place in the right way, in the House of Commons, behind closed doors, and that is the only way that you can reach a conclusion properly. But then whatever the decision is, you need to get behind the outcome, and it is only parties that are united that win general elections. It is divided parties that lose them.
Yeah, so lots of closed doors in Westminster in these weeks ahead. Charlie Rowley, thank you very much indeed for bringing us that from Birmingham, and I know you've waited to get on air for a little while there with all the queues of MPs. Much appreciated. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Joining us now in the studio is our political reporter, Catherine Forster. My goodness,
much
Catherine.
happening then.
I have been to loads of Labour Party conferences that over the years that felt like the Conservative Party conference felt this week. I have never been to a Conservative Party conference which felt so lacking in discipline, Catherine.
A feeling of complete chaos, a complete breakdown in discipline, not just backbench MPs freelancing, saying, we don't like this, we don't want that, you've got to scrap it, but also cabinet ministers saying different things. Penny Mordaunt, I mean, yesterday you'd have thought would be a little bit quiet after Kwasi Kwarteng's speech. They'd backtracked on the 45p. But yesterday, it seemed to get even worse for the government, because then the rebels thought, OK, we don't like this. But it wasn't just the rebels, was it? Penny Mordaunt saying, yes, benefits should be uprated in line with inflation, which is the opposite of what we are certain Liz Truss wants to do and believes that she's going to stick to. Then other people, Welsh Secretary Robert Buckland on telly last night saying that he agreed with that. Big Beast, Ian Duncan-Smith, David Frost, obviously not in the cabinet, but rowing in behind her. And then Suella Braverman saying, well, I was very happy with the 45p tax cut. Why? I'm very disappointed. And then saying there's been a coup. Kemi Badenoch, also in the cabinet, saying that's not the right language. Absolute chaos. So today, threats, basically, that when they get back to Westminster, they are going to have to toe the line. These backbench MPs, if they think they're going to force the Prime Minister's hand, that potentially, if they vote against this mini-budget, they will have the whip withdrawn.
And not just that, people now really fed up that moving on up's been used as the music for the God. What a rookie error, isn't it?
Goodness, yes, we're told that Liz Truss chose this song personally. Now, the lead singer's son is a Labour councillor elected last year, and people founder Mike Pickering is apparently livid that they used the song. It sounds like they haven't been clarified if they'd got permission. It sounds unlikely that they had got permission. And he has said, suggested that they looked at the lyrics, go and pack your bags and get out. Of course, the lyrics that Liz Truss would have focused on...
It's not funny.
You're laughing as well. Why are you picking on me?
She's chosen it for the moving on up, and nothing can stop me. But...
didn't quite get to the end of the song and realise what else it said.
Also, Nicola Sturgeon, Scottish First Minister, was tweeting. She said the biggest break on UK growth is Brexit. That tweet was then hastily deleted, but not before a kind person had screenshotted it and shared it extensively across Twitter. And Rachel Reeves, the Shadow Chancellor, she said she has been at the heart of building a Conservative economy that has led to the flat wages and low growth she highlighted today. And that, of course, is a problem. She's been a government minister
12 years.
Yeah.
What about this benefits decision? Because what can't happen, in my view, if I was advising the Tory party, you can't have this running commentary. You can't have it going until the 23rd of November or whenever they have to take a decision, whatever decision that is, otherwise people will keep freelancing. Any sign or indication of when there will be a decision on whether benefits, many of whom are claimed by people in work, will rise in line with prices?
Well, Chloe Smith, the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions, was on television this morning. She was saying, we can't give you an answer at the moment. The reason we can't give you an answer is because there's a few more weeks processes have to be followed. We've got to get all the available information in. She obviously is in Cabinet. I interviewed her for GBNews the other day. She didn't answer that question. She's saying why, but she had sounded like she was sympathetic to helping those at the very bottom. But it's far from clear that Liz Truss is going to allow that. And there's many MPs thinking that, yet again, the messaging of this is the Conservative Party care about the people at the top. They're really not that bothered about the people at the bottom. And they think that this also, along with the 45p tax rate cut, the reversal has happened, that this is also a toxic message. And they want to stop it.
Sir Keir Starmer, with his reaction, tweeting that the Tories have refused to abandon their kamikaze budget that crashed the economy. And is the point, actually, that it's not about Liz Truss, it's about what Kwasi Kwarteng can do to turn the economy round and what happens with the next interest rate rise coming up with the Bank of England in November. They may try and nuance that a bit, but, it's the hard economic realities that's going to bite them, isn't it?
Sure. Now, obviously, they are absolutely committed to these policies. They are convinced this is going to bring growth, but that will take a considerable... You can create the conditions to create growth, but you can't just make growth happen overnight. And also, apparently, while she was speaking, 2-year fixed mortgage rate topped 6% for the first time in 14 years. Ouch. So they're saying that mortgages are becoming... The mortgage burden, if you like, in terms of percentage of...
disposable income.
Is now at the highest level since the late 80s, and that, of course, came before the big house price
just when people
crash.
were starting out, I seem to... Anyway, there we are. Even though they were big in the 90s. Thank you very much indeed. We'll see what songs pop up next to describe the situation. Thank you.
Well, the government have had their focus on conference over the last few days, but many of our local authorities have been focused on tackling the cost of living crisis.
Yeah, now some councils in Northern Ireland fighting soaring inflation with policies that were first used during the pandemic. In towns depending on seasonal income, for instance, local governments trying to be more inventive to stop the costs rebounding onto domestic rates, as our reporter Dougie Beattie tells us.
The North Antrim coastline is both rugged and beautiful, and storms can appear in an instant. The council here are moving to stay ahead of the financial one that may be heading their way. Causeway Coast and Glens hosts many of Northern Ireland's top tourist destinations. The income that supplies is very seasonal, and the jobs that it creates are lowly paid. The lack of big corporate business here means that the domestic rate is heavily relied on. Ivor Wallace explains how a COVID strategy is the foundation for a policy that may keep the cost of local government down while getting help to where it is needed most.
The positive of COVID was that it forced us, maybe the wrong word, us to do a strategy where we have brought all the different organisations together, and we're all be able to work together then. So, food banks, social supermarkets, all these community groups that were out there already doing a great job, and they were all going their own ways, whereas we were able to bring them all together, give everybody a wee bit of direction, them come back to us and tell us what they needed.
Ricky Wright chairs the poverty group and has seen a different demographic using charities.
We're definitely seeing a rise in people who normally were able to easily afford the basics, but also afford holidays or other things in a middle class way that have had to really cut back on those costs. So I think everyone's in the same storm, where the rising cost of living is impacting everyone, but maybe not everyone's in the same boat. There's some people who are operating on very marginal disposable income, and they're definitely being hit the hardest, but definitely people on the middle class are still being hit hard in terms of having to cut back on certain costs, and may find themselves in a place where they just can't afford to pay some of the outgoings that they've committed to.
Head of Council Services Julie Welch is aware that the priority of budgets may change for now, but sees the importance of future relations with all the current stakeholders.
We've had to think differently about prioritising what are the most immediate needs, but also thinking longer term in terms of how do we grow that infrastructure again. We need to deal with the crisis now, but we also need to look at the medium and longer term prospects for council and at the local council area, and that's why that framework in terms of the anti-poverty plan I think is so important in terms of how it even feeds into other local and regional strategies.
All around Britain, towns like this survive on the revenue from those that visit and holiday there. But with the middle classes now feeling the financial squeeze, how much priority will be given to leisure activities and the rewards that they bring? Dougie Beattie, GB News.
Surfers of Northern Ireland. Now, coming up here on GB Newsday, we'll be discussing the latest announcement from the Home Secretary from that speech yesterday that police will be attending all reported burglaries.
Part of a series of initiatives to crack down on crime which have been revealed this week. Before that, a short break.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB Newsday with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria De Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around. With all the biggest topics and guests, you will always be up to date. GB Newsday and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me! And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
The time is 27 minutes past 1. You're watching GB Newsday. Police chiefs in England have promised to send an officer to every home that's been burgled.
Well, that pledge means forces will be obliged to investigate all burglaries, regardless of location or even what items were even stolen.
It's after Home Office figures for the year to March showed just 6.3% of robbery offences and 4.1% of thefts in England and Wales resulted in charges.
Well, I'm pleased to say we can now welcome an expert in investigating burglaries and a lot else, star of stage, screen and television, Peter Blexley, former Scotland Yard detective. Welcome to you. Good to see you again. So we've got the policy and we've got the problem identified. What about the people to actually do this job?
Absolutely right. And I mean, I welcome this announcement, but what officer is going to attend these crimes? Of course, so many frontline roles now are occupied with officers who've just come through their training or might only have a year or two in service, and this is very much an issue. And of course, to properly investigate a burglary, you don't only go to the house that's been broken into, you knock next door. And you go next door but one, and you also go over the road. And you say to anybody, did you see anything? Did you hear anything? Have you looked in your garden in the last day or two? Have you got any CCTV? Did you have a relative visiting yesterday who might have a dash cam in their car? And so it goes, because if you're going to investigate something, investigate it properly.
Time consuming.
Yes, it is.
Yeah. And Peter, most people, including myself, to be honest, when I saw that headline, were thinking, are we supposed to be grateful that if we get burgled, the police will turn up? I mean, how did we get to that place where that is a headline that we're all discussing today?
How long have we got to discuss the demise of modern policing? Because sadly, in the last 20 years, its reputation, in many regards rightfully so, has absolutely hit rock bottom, because police has got so distracted in recent years by trying to be everything to everyone, instead of actually sticking to the core principles of policing, which were written nearly 200 years ago by Sir Robert Peel and are as apt and as appropriate today as they were all those years ago.
Right. Has the problem been the investigative arm, if you like, CID in particular? You've now got so many things you've got to undertake. White-collar crime, very technical fraud. You've got anti-terror crime. You've got organised crime coming in from abroad. They're actually dealing with the bread and butter stuff, someone might have said, of burglary and theft, is right down the end of the scale for you.
Well, so many senior officers who have climbed that greasy pole of promotion and now occupy the highest ranks have been responsible in the last 20 years for downgrading the role of the local CID, the local detectives, because they thought it was a little bit elitist, and they didn't like that.
Because you could wear a suit instead of your uniform and so on.
Exactly, or jeans and a bomber jacket if you were on the local burglary squad. How I pine for those days. But, you know, it's such a shame that this expertise has been lost. And just to focus a moment, if we may, on going to a burglary, you know, these officers that attend there, they've got to understand what they're looking for. A shoe mark, for example, in the garden, on a floor, on a tile. And then how do they preserve that or photograph it so that it's of evidential value for a forensic scientist to compare maybe to a shoe mark that was found 3 weeks ago at another burglary. And so it goes on.
Yeah.
Points of entry, tools used to go in, and also issuing crime prevention advice.
Right.
Because that's all a part of it. I know there are many, many retired detectives, recently retired, who would come back to investigate these burglaries at a fraction of the cost of what they were previously paid, because they're now on their pensions.
Yeah.
They could come back, they've got more experience than you could dream of, and they could possibly lead or shadow or work alongside younger, less experienced officers, because it's no point going to a burglary unless you'll investigate it properly.
And Peter, I don't know if this is small print in the quote from the National Police Chiefs Council, but I wondered if you could enlighten us, because what that statement said was that chief constables will work to ensure the approach is implemented, this is the small print, as soon as practically possible. When's that?
Well, time waits for no man, and I'm not getting any younger. I just hope that I get to see this implemented properly and that burglary detection rates go up and more burglars go to jail.
Do you fancy going back on the job?
In a heartbeat.
Really?
I'd rather be...
Even with all the telework that you do?
I'd rather be properly investigating domestic burglaries or residential burglaries this afternoon than, with all due respect, sitting in your studio.
Well, there we are.
Well, charming. But we'll take it. We'll take it, yeah.
Nice choice of tie and shirt, by the way. So, yeah.
Thank you.
What, because it's the same as yours? Coming up after the news, we will be discussing strikes. Are you at home being affected by the actions? We'll be talking Ukraine too, as Putin faces the prospect of a modern-day Vietnam situation. And we'll be chatting about Elon Musk too. Is he going to be good for free speech when he's in charge of Twitter? First, it's a Newsday update with Rosie.
Very good afternoon to you, 1:32. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date. Protesters disrupted the Prime Minister's first conference speech as party leader.
Let's get them removed.
It was Liz Truss saying, let's get them removed. Two Greenpeace demonstrators she was talking about who were quickly escorted from the hall after waving a flag which said, "Who voted for this?" Conservative members responded by applauding Liz Truss to show their support. She then went to reassure the party that both she and the Chancellor are in complete lockstep with each other on the plan to get the economy growing.
I have three priorities for our economy: growth, growth, and growth. Growth means more money in people's pockets. It means businesses creating new jobs. Growth means people can feel secure and they can plan for their future. Fundamentally, growth helps people fulfil their hopes and their dreams. And that's why our dynamic new Chancellor and I will be taking action in three areas.
Irishman Rory Mason's been killed while fighting for Ukraine's International Legion near the Russian border. The 23-year-old's father said his family is enormously proud of his courage, determination and selflessness by enlisting to support the country. As you're about to hear, there's more travel disruption for rail passengers. ASLEF and TSSA union members are again striking over pay, jobs and conditions. That's had an impact on services across the country. ASLEF General Secretary Mick Whelan says the industrial action will continue until the government intervenes. We're on your TV, online and on your DAB+ radio. It's GB News. A quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.333 and 1.143 euros. The price of gold is £1,510 and 58 pence per ounce, and the FTSE 100's at 7,016 points.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB Newsday with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria De Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around. With all the biggest topics and guests, you will always be up to date. GB Newsday and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me! And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Now, latest on the train strikes and the latest reaction to the Tory party conference, two in one, if you like, because the RMT's General Secretary, Mick Lynch, has called on Prime Minister Liz Truss to stop maligning trade unions, labelling them as the anti-growth coalition.
His comments came in response to Liz Truss's speech at the Conservative Party conference earlier today.
Well, rail passengers themselves confronted with another strike today, the long-running dispute, of course, over paid jobs and conditions. Thousands of workers from the Drivers' Union, ASLEF, and the Transport Salary Staff Association joining today's walkout, although we have to say it's not affecting all rail lines.
We can now talk to our West Midlands reporter, Jack Carson, who is at Birmingham New Street Station. My goodness, all those Conservative Party members will be hoping to get home. Have they got any chance of doing so, Jack?
Absolutely not today. All services here at Grand Central at Birmingham New Street have been cancelled today and stopped. No train services from any companies. That includes Avanti West Coast, Cross Country and West Midlands Railway as well. So that means as well students and commuters as well that usually pass through this station can't use the services either. Outside of London, New Street here is one of the busiest stations in the UK, and it's a weird, eerily sound that you can't hear the screeches of those trains on those tracks around me today. Now, when this strike was called and this industrial action was called, Mick Lynch said that the General Secretary of ASLEF said that actually they were only in dispute against the companies that hadn't offered their drivers any pay increase, and those drivers hadn't had a pay increase since 2019. But the Rail Delivery Group, which is part of National Rail that works with all the trading companies and commuters as well, said and tweeted earlier today that they wanted progress, not strikes, and a fair deal for taxpayers today. But all services today have stopped, and that disruption, like you said, affects Tory party conference members and delegates trying to get home today. The West Midlands Railway Service as well said that there's still disruption expected tomorrow morning as well, and of course on Saturday when there's another strike, when the RMT union and their 40,000 members also walk out. But it's no train services here at New Street today, and that disruption continues.
Jack, we can see one or two people still wandering around behind you, clearly trying to find out if they can get anywhere. Have you managed to speak to any of them, see if they are growing increasingly frustrated about this?
Some commuters have turned up today that didn't expect the rail strikes to be on. But usually people are kind of in a rush. Most people have stayed away from the station today. A few people I spoke to sitting down, understood why action was taking place, and understood why the train drivers were on strike, and kind of had settled for the fact that they couldn't, had to make alternative arrangements today as well.
And in terms of what the picket lines are doing, that seems quite quiet. Clearly, that might be a different position on Saturday because we've got a far wider indication of disruption then.
Yeah, there isn't actually any picket line here at New Street today. No actual protesters or strikers out here on a picket line today. But like you said, when the RMT union, their 40,000 members, strike on Saturday, we probably will expect here at New Street to see a few of those members out here making their case for better pay and better working conditions as well.
And to add to the joy, it's pouring with rain as well. Jack at Birmingham New Street Station, thanks very much indeed for updating us there.
Living the dream.
Living the dream, indeed.
Now, Russian President Vladimir Putin formally announced that he was annexing 4 regions of Ukraine last week. Since then, thousands have been trying to flee the regions, and there are roughly 4,500 people queuing to leave. It's taken people up to 4 days, with many having to sleep in their cars. The mayor of Melitopol, Ivan Fedorov, said that an elderly man died in the queue yesterday. Ukraine is still making strong advances, and forces are currently taking back key areas in Kherson, Kharkiv and Donetsk. In the last few hours, Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov has pledged to retake annexed areas and said they will be with Russia forever.
Well, let's speak now to Alexander Krebet, who's a reporter at the Kiev Independent newspaper. Thank you very much for joining us, Alexander. What would people there make of this latest utterance from Moscow that they're going to take back these areas? It seems that the tide is going against them.
So the Ukrainians and Ukrainian officials and the publicity, they don't like pay attention to those moves from the Putin. So they can sign any paper, whatever it takes them, but it's still the internationally recognized Ukrainian territory. All of those 4 regions: Kharkiv, Zaporizhia, Kherson, and Donetsk, and Luhansk for sure, the 5th one. So definitely Ukrainians are really looking forward to recapturing the areas and settlements occupied by Russia before. So within the last 5 days since this sham referendum took hold place, Ukrainian army liberated over 3,000 settlements, and just recently we got a fresh report on the newly liberated areas in Luhansk region, which was occupied by Russia in spring, with the heavy fightings over there during that time.
Alexander, sorry, I was going to just tell you about our Prime Minister, Liz Truss, and what she said this morning in her speech. She said that Ukraine will win and that no peace deal should give away Ukrainian territory. How important are those words like that from the international community? How important is the political solidarity we give to you?
Ukrainians really appreciate with Liz Prime Minister Truss the words. So the Ukrainian authorities and the president, the prime minister, they say the same. So there is no negotiations on the Ukrainian territory, even the peace negotiations, and the Security Council of Ukraine just stated that Ukraine will not negotiate until the Putin regime will change. So the Liz Truss is just following those statements by the Ukrainian officials.
And what have you been learning about the experiences of these people in these particular areas? Because we have to obviously reiterate that many of them are Russian-speaking and have identified with Russia in the past.
I'm originally from one of those regions, and I'm reporting on those occupied territories since the very first day of the war. And yes, a lot of people fled the area. The majority fled the area since the February, but some of those who stayed under the Russian occupation, they are still trying to pass the intelligence information to the Ukrainian special services, and we have the consequences of this. So a lot of Russian ammunition depots, Russian military bases, the Wagner Group bases being destroyed only because of the local Ukrainians who live under the occupation. They watch the Russian troops movements, and they pass this information to the Ukrainian army. And yes, right now in some regions they are really critical situation because the people, they don't have water supplies, they don't have electricity, they don't have gas, and it's cold outside already, and it's becoming colder and colder, and there sometimes Russian troops don't resupply those occupied territories, which they have to under the international law, and they do not let people to flee the area, for example, to buy supplies somehow. Like before those sham referendums, people really could cross back and forth those contact lines, so-called. But now, since the sham referendum results been announced, so the Russian troops almost don't allow people to leave the Russian occupied territories of Ukraine into the non-occupied territory.
Alexander from the Kiev Independent, thank you very much for updating us with the position there on the ground. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me.
Well, for a military and historical perspective, joining us now is the political analyst Robert Kelly. He's arguing that Putin faces the prospect of a modern-day Vietnam situation as long as the conflict continues. Just explain that analogy for us, Robert.
Sure. So the Russians are losing the war, and I think the primary interest Putin has now with the mobilization is to bridge him through until the winter and hope that European opinion, German opinion particularly, will fold and sort of force the Ukrainians to make a peace deal, right? If he does not, right, if the Germans don't break, if the Europeans hold, and the West continues to provide support to Ukraine through the winter, Ukraine will probably come into the spring and launch a major offensive, and that will probably continue to break Russian lines. And then Russia breaks, basically the war sort of bogs down on the Russian side into this kind of long-term slog where the two sides really sort of struggle to maintain control over small bits of territory. But either Russia stays and sort of fights this long, protracted, uncomfortable conflict akin to Vietnam or Afghanistan, or withdrawals and admits defeat, right? And this is something, as your reporters and others have mentioned, right, that Putin doesn't really want to do, right? That he's sort of very susceptible to sort of perception of humiliation, right? So if the Russians don't win soon, right, if the winter doesn't break European support for Ukraine, I think that Putin is looking at a substantial a quagmire basically next year.
Yeah, there is another analysis, as you'll know, Robert, and that is that he could be so frustrated, cornered, if you like, that he may resort to these tactical nuclear weapons. There have been reports that this so-called nuclear train has been seen moving. I mean, what do you make of that?
Yeah, I don't think there's actually the likelihood of a nuclear weapon use in the next few months, right? There's only a couple more months left when the weather is actually good enough for combat. Pretty soon it's going to get cold, right? Sort of like a cold winter on sort of the open sort of North European plain is going to be pretty cold. And so operations will probably stop from December until maybe February, and then things will start up in the spring. And if the Ukrainians start to win in the spring in the way they won just a couple weeks ago, and there's a breakthrough, then again, Russia sort of faces this choice, right? You know, do you sort of bog down into this long conflict? The last time the Russians did that in the 80s, it was a disaster in Afghanistan. Or do you do what you're suggesting, which is actually use like a major strategy, battlefield changing tactic, which would be a nuclear weapon? Would that work? Could the Russians actually find a target that would justify that much force? Would they use a weapon like this in a city? If they did, they would be accused of nuclear genocide. I'm actually rather skeptical that Putin will take this action because it's not clear to me what he would strike with it. But I think for the moment that the idea of the reserves in the war, the mobilization we saw in the last couple of weeks, is designed to sort of hold the Ukrainians off for a few more months till the winter, hope his luck changes with a cold, and then in the spring, I think, will be the real nuclear discussion, right, when the Russians are really on the ropes.
When Putin says that he will use all available means to keep Russia safe, how should we interpret it?
I do think that means he would be willing to use nuclear weapons if the war spread into Russia, which I think is highly unlikely. The Biden administration has made it very clear that, and NATO generally has made it very clear that aid to Ukraine is dependent on Ukraine not doing that. We've been very clear to the Ukrainians they shouldn't strike Ukraine or Russia, even when Russian bases are being used to fire into Ukraine. That actually shows a great deal of restraint, I would add, on Kiev's part. I mean, the suggestion that Kiev's war goals are going to sort of include bombing Moscow, which was suggested on Russian TV the other day, that's not going to happen, right? And so I actually think the Ukrainians have behaved rather well. But if the war did actually spill into Russia itself, then I do think the Russians would be willing to use nuclear weapons. I think the other issue, the more pressing issue, is this issue of sort of Putin's humiliation, right? If Putin is really winning the war, if the Ukrainians are really rolling the Russians out come the spring, the whole Russian front is collapsing along the lines of like 1917 when Russia was pushed out of the war, First World War. Then Putin's in a tight spot, right? Either he admits humiliation, admits defeat and withdrawals, right? Or, he tries the sort of shock tactic of nuclear weapons. But I mean, the costs of that are huge. China would abandon him. India would abandon him. Much of the global south, the countries and, neutral countries in the global south who've sort of tried to sort of stay out of the conflict, they would, I think, feel compelled to tip away from Russia, and Russia would be very, very badly isolated. So I think it's unlikely.
There may even be those in the Kremlin that decides that it's not worth the game, indeed. Robert, as ever, thank you very much indeed for your analysis. Good to talk to you there. Thank you very much indeed.
Well, Liz Truss laid out her vision this morning to the party conference, but really speaking to all of us, saying she will forge ahead with her economic plan, regardless of any disruption it may cause. Let's see what the reaction from members, party members who were in that audience. Tom Howard speaking to them straight after she stopped talking.
She showed she knows what she's talking about. She got them in her hand after about 5 minutes, and then she just grew and grew and grew. There's not many gets that many standing ovations.
I think she did very well. Yeah, no cheese speech moments. It was really good. I was a bit worried, but no, I think she did a great job, a really good job. I'm inspired by it. So that's what she needed to do, and she did it.
Exactly the same inspiration and lifting the conference which was needed. It's not going to be easy. Let's get real here. Yeah. It's going to be a slow journey, but we're going to get there with Liz.
Brilliant, absolutely fantastic, much better than expected. Before I was a bit worried, but now I feel very reassured, and she's strong and positive, and the ministers she's got behind her are brilliant. They are first-class ministers. You couldn't get them better, really couldn't.
Oh, amazing. I really enjoyed it. It was very positive, very upbeat, and very excited, and also that interjunction by the eco-activists, I thought she handled very well, very calmly, and the response from the audience was amazing, so I couldn't be happier. Very happy.
Happy delegates in Birmingham a little later. Not so happy protesters in central London at the moment. Let's bring you some breaking news, because Just Stop Oil have been facing arrests as we speak in central London. They've been staging sit-down protests, blocking entrances to major roads. The 5th day of demonstrations in Westminster.
Police arresting 54 people yesterday. Well, our national reporter Paul Hawkins is in Westminster for us from the front line, on the front line. Paul, just explain what is going on behind you.
Well, I think I'll let the pictures speak for themselves, to be honest, Gloria. They've been walking up and down this road. We're right next to the Houses of Parliament. This is Millbank, where a lot of the media are based. And these protesters have been walking up and down here. Some of them were arrested just now. We think there have been dozens of arrests today. This is the 4th day of protests. And in the last half an hour or so, the police removed some of the protesters from a crossing. They glued themselves to the crossing. So at the moment, they've been taken away and they're just marching up and down this road next to Parliament. And they're, well, you can hear from what they're singing, they want an end to all kind of fossil fuels. Sorry, what's your name?
My name is Sean.
Can we just have a quick chat with you while we're walking?
Yes, but I might interrupt a few times because I'm trying to keep this organised.
OK, sure. Just very quickly, just tell us why you're doing this.
So my name is Sean. I'm 25 years old. I used to work in green renewable energy. Right now, what we're seeing with the cost of living crisis and the energy crisis is that's simply not working. The government is subsidising billionaires and fossil fuel industries by millions of pounds a week. Green energy cannot keep up with that while those subsidies are still there. People will freeze and starve in their homes this winter because our government is more interested in insulating bankers' pockets than our homes.
Yeah, but surely this, people might want to move towards renewable energy and more renewable sources and onto clean. That's going to take time, and at the moment there's an energy crisis.
Absolutely. So we've got 8 years worth of reserve. By the government's own recollection, it's 8 years worth of reserve. What we need to see is moving away with the funding. Our demand is not to stop all fossil fuels. My phone in my pocket comes from fossil fuels. We are aware that we need it at the moment, but we need to transition. Yeah. So we need to transition away from these things, and the longer we leave it, the more people will starve. We had 40 degrees this summer. The fire service was in such desperate state.
Is this the way to go about it, though? Gluing yourself to the floor and causing days and days of disruption?
So, I'm a gay man. All of our people would have died in the AIDS crisis had people not taken direct action. We stand on the shoulders of giants. This is what direct action looks like. This is what civil resistance is. This is making a government change.
All right, thanks for speaking to us, Sean. Really appreciate it. Thank you very much. There you go. So Sean kind of giving you an idea there, Gloria and Mark, about why they're here, and they're going to be here for some time to come.
Paul, give us an idea about the police operation. We've seen quite a few vans there behind you as well. I think the number yesterday, 54 arrested yesterday.
In the voice of my great
Yeah, it's a significant police operation, actually. If I just show you here, the police are following behind in convoy. If I just look further down the street, though, there were 3, 4, 5 police vans or so, and I've noticed it's not just Metropolitan Police, it's also City of London Police. If we have a look this way, you can see on the corner there more police officers there holding up the traffic as this protest moves down Whitehall towards Parliament Square. So there is a significant police operation. I have to say it's been pretty good-natured so far between the protesters and the police as well. The police came along, they had teams with solvents who helped get the protesters' hands off the pavements. It was done in a fairly good-natured way, and actually it feels like a fairly good-natured protest the way it's being handled by the police, so credit to them.
And MPs aren't there at the moment, but the building that you're just walking past now, the House of Commons, there'll be loads of staff in there still, making sure the place is operating OK. Are people able to move freely in and out of the House of Commons, of Parliament?
Yeah, they are. Yeah, they are able to move in and out of Parliament fairly easily. I mean, obviously, it's a heightened presence from the police, so they'll be checking more diligently than normal. But the staff and the people who are working in Parliament, even though it's in recess, they are able to move in and out of there freely. So whether you agree with this protest or not, it is their democratic right. It is, and at the moment, it seems to be being handled very well by the authorities and by the police.
They're heading towards the bridge there, Paul. Any indication they'll stop them once they actually reach the bridge there?
No, not sure, to be honest. I'm not sure where they're going at the moment, but one would have thought if they're not allowed to go, you know, they would have outlined their plans to the police, and if they want to go beyond the bridge and they're not allowed to, then the police will stop them when they get there.
Yeah. Great stuff, Paul. Thank you very much indeed for updating us with that breaking news down at Westminster. Thanks for your time.
You are with GB Newsday with Mark Longhurst and Gloria De Piero. Stay with us. We'll be bringing you the latest news from across the UK, but now it's your weather.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB Newsday with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria De Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christie's. I'm not here to mess around. With all the biggest topics and guests, you will always be up to date. GB Newsday and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and tune-in apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
The time is exactly 2 o'clock. You're watching GB Newsday with me, Gloria De Piero, and Mark Longhurst.
Yes, well, Liz Truss vowing that the status quo is not an option, setting out that vision for Britain at the Conservative Party conference in Birmingham. Well, after being interrupted by Greenpeace protesters, with that banner, she pressed home her pro-growth agenda, plans to deal with the energy crisis and support available to people facing higher bills. Plenty of reaction analysis coming up.
Plus, there are reports of rapid advances for Ukraine forces in a bid to retake key regions from the Russians. We'll be talking to former heavyweight boxer Vitaly Klitschko, who's now the mayor of Kiev, on how he sees the current situation. And there's major transport disruption with around 9,000 train drivers out on strike. How much more of this can we expect? How much more can we take? Before that, it's the latest news with Rosie.
And very good afternoon to you. Coming up to 2 minutes past 2, I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date today on GB News. Protesters disrupted the Prime Minister's first Conservative conference speech as party leader.
Let's get them removed.
That was Liz Truss saying, let's get them removed. 2 Greenpeace demonstrators were then quickly escorted from the hall, having waved a flag which said, "Who voted for this?" Conservative members responded by applauding Liz Truss to show their support. She then went to reassure the party that both she and the Chancellor are in complete lockstep with each other on the plan to get the economy growing.
I have 3 priorities for our economy: growth, growth and growth. Growth means more money in people's pockets. It means businesses creating new jobs. Growth means people can feel secure and they can plan for their future. Fundamentally, growth helps people fulfil their hopes and their dreams. And that's why our dynamic new Chancellor and I will be taking action in 3 areas.
Well, outside the conference, the head of public affairs at Greenpeace, Rebecca Newsom, explained why they interrupted Liz Truss's speech.
This year, we really felt we needed to make an intervention because nobody actually voted for a lot of what Liz Truss and her government are trying to do at the moment. Nobody voted for fracking. Nobody voted to cut benefits. Nobody voted to trash nature. Nobody voted to scrap workers' rights. There's a whole host of things that the Conservative government were elected to do in 2019 that they're simply not doing. And we needed to take that message and represent the public.
There's more travel disruption today for rail passengers. ASLEF and TSSA union members are striking again over paid jobs and conditions. That's had an impact on services across the country. The ASLEF General Secretary Mick Whelan says the action will continue until the government intervenes.
It's about the people you represent. They haven't had a pay rise for 3 years. Our employers are privateers. We don't work for the government. We don't work for the DfT. They seem to have done a rather corrupt deal with the government where they're not allowed to offer us a cost of living increase. So when we talk to our employers, they say you've got to talk to the government. And when we talk to the government, they say we've got to talk to our employers. After 3 years, our members have had enough.
Police forces across England and Wales have agreed to send an officer to every home burglary. It's part of a new set of measures designed to ensure more crimes are being solved and more offenders prosecuted. The National Police Chiefs Council said chief constables will work to ensure the approach is implemented as soon as practically possible. A 23-year-old Irish man has been killed while fighting in Ukraine. Rory Mason from County Meath has been engaged in a battle near the Russian border. His father, Rob, said the family was enormously proud of his courage, determination and selflessness by enlisting to support Ukraine. Well, meanwhile, the Russian President Putin has signed a law legalising the so-called annexation of 4 Ukrainian regions. That's according to Russian media. The European Parliament president said that sham referendums would not change the status of areas which remain part of an independent Ukraine. On the ground, Ukraine is continuing to make gains in offensive operations along both the northeastern and southern fronts. The EU is going to use satellites to try to prevent attacks on energy infrastructure. The Commissioner Ursula von der Leyen says the recent acts of sabotage against Nord Stream gas pipelines show how vulnerable the energy infrastructure is and that it needs protecting. She says it's in the interest of all Europeans to heighten security.
We will make best use of our satellite surveillance capacity. We have these satellites in place. We have the capacity to do the surveillance, to detect potential threats. So this is also a matter of prevention and awareness.
Just Stop Oil demonstrators have stopped traffic in central London and have glued their hands to pavements. They're demanding that the UK government immediately stops the exploration, development and production of fossil fuels. The protest started this morning in Westminster. Around 30 supporters have blocked 2 junctions leading up to Lambeth Bridge in London. The Home Secretary said yesterday that police must have all the powers they need to stop protesters who use guerrilla tactics. A man who entered the grounds of Windsor Castle with a loaded crossbow on Christmas Day has appeared in court on charges of treason and making threats to kill the Queen. Jaswant Singh Charlie is also charged with possession of an offensive weapon. Prosecutors said there was potential for him to cause serious or fatal injuries. The late Queen had been in residence at the castle at the time. The 21-year-old will face trial in March next year. You're up to date now on GB News. I'll bring you more as it happens. Now, back to Newsday.
The Prime Minister has today set out her vision for Britain, promising to back growth and aspiration. Liz Truss told the Tory party conference in Birmingham to trust her to do what it takes to push through her difficult but necessary economic agenda.
But of course it comes after days of political and market turmoil after the Chancellor's mini-budget, you remember. So while the Prime Minister is promising long-term economic success, has she actually convinced the party and, more importantly, the country that she's the woman and the government to achieve it?
Our political reporter, Catherine Forster, is here with us. How would you describe Tory party conference?
In one word? No?
Horrendous.
Oh, really?
For the mood was really terrible, and because they were very publicly fighting among themselves, weren't they? The public don't like to see divided parties. They like to see united parties. We're used to seeing this sort of squabbling with the Labour Party, with Jeremy Corbyn going back a couple of years ago.
I've got the scars on my back, Catherine.
Yeah, that sort of lack of discipline, that arguing, that fighting. And now we are seeing that within the Conservative Party, who've just got rid of Boris Johnson because they thought that he was dragging them down in the polls, that the general election might be lost if they kept a hold of him. And the membership would put in place somebody who seems to be going to be just as divisive and is actually currently even more unpopular at the moment.
Yeah, job done, it seems, in Birmingham in terms of the party faithful. Lots of clapping, a standing ovation at the end. So clearly the party managers think, well, we've achieved that, we've got that done. But now the focus goes back to Westminster and an indication from Number 10 saying that the party whips will try and get a handle on this. But is it that much out of control that basically on the issue particularly of whether you link inflation to benefits or whether you link it to prices, there is such a division in the party now that this is going to carry on when they get back to Westminster?
Yes, it really is. I mean, the whole, like the speech, I think she did as good as a job as she could have done under the circumstances. She was fairly fluent, she sounded confident, she made it clear. She said, you know, we have your back to the population. She made it clear about her ordinary background, the first Prime Minister to go to a comprehensive school. Labour said, no, that's not true. Gordon Brown did. In fact, Gordon Brown went to a selective state school. So, in fact, she is right in that claim, although she spent a lot of the leadership campaign slagging it off, didn't she?
And we do remember, actually, just to interject, there was actually, do you remember a pupil from that school who said actually that she unfairly dissed the school, that actually there were a lot of people that did quite well from that particular school.
That it was a good school,
Yeah.
that she'd actually been given extra tuition in maths and economics to get her to where she did.
Anyway.
But yes, I think this party discipline problem is set to continue. Obviously, it's particularly acute at conference because all these ministers, all these MPs going to fringe events, saying what's on their mind. So the sort of oxygen of publicity that they've had at conference will diminish a bit when they're all back in one place. But certainly these divisions are not going away anytime soon, are they? Because she's trying to take them in quite a different direction to the direction under Cameron, under May, under Boris Johnson.
So Suella Braverman was one of the Home Secretary. She was speaking at a fringe meeting and she referred to there being an internal coup against Liz Truss, with particular reference to that 45p tax U-turn. Who does she need to watch? Is there any? Is there any sub? But is there a ringlead?
How long have you got?
Because a coup suggests organisation. Coups normally have leaders. I mean, who are her enemies?
Well, obviously, Michael Gove and Grant Shapps led the charge, didn't they, to get the 45p tax cut reversed. But there are many, many MPs, One Nation, but broader than that are unhappy about the direction. Ian Duncan-Smith has been critical, even David Frost, people that are supportive of her broadly, are saying that, you know, so far she hasn't got off to a great start. Things haven't been handled well. Mistakes have been made. Even economists that support her have said things have been badly handled.
Yeah.
So, and within her own cabinet, I mean, she very specifically said she'd bring in a government of all the talents and then left nearly everybody out except for her own supporters. And I think that really may come back to bite her because there are a lot of big beasts, aren't there, roaming around without cabinet jobs that don't really have anything to lose. It's not like they can be bribed by a just keep quiet now and we'll sort of pay you back in a year.
But the other thing is there's a big beast who has got a job, a very high-ranking job, Penny Mordaunt. She went public and there was a huge intake of breath. And the cutaway of her in the audience today, she didn't look that impressed with what she was hearing or perhaps not hearing. What happens to her?
Yeah, well, I mean, she got a big job leader of the House of Commons, although not as big a job as she would have liked. So she is within that tent, but clearly, I mean, there is supposed to be cabinet collective responsibility, isn't there? You take
as the whips keep reminding them, yeah.
You disagree privately, but the disagreement is very public.
I asked Steve Baker, actually. We spoke to him earlier. I know we're going to take a look at a clip from that interview, but I specifically said, should she be sacked for not sticking to collective responsibility? And he said, that's a matter for the Prime Minister. Well, Liz Truss sought to rally her MPs during her speech at the Conservative Party conference amid a difficult week of rows about tax cuts and benefits. As I was saying, Northern Ireland Minister Steve Baker gave his reaction to Liz Truss's speech to us earlier on the show.
At last, after 30 years, we've got a Prime Minister with an absolutely sincere and steadfast commitment to prosperity through freedom. I mean, it's such a relief. I'm extremely pleased. And now I hope all Conservative MPs, whether they're in the Cabinet or on the back benches, will decide that this is what they want and get behind the Prime Minister. Look, the reality is, with inflation at levels where it is, it's a very grave problem for everyone, for businesses, for households, for individuals, and yes, for government, for the NHS. I mean, our fire service just had a big boost to funding and it's been eaten up by energy bills. You know, it is an extremely serious situation. So I don't want to second-guess decisions which are very tough to take with big trade-offs. But, you know, people will know I've got a long record of saying that the universal credit uplift should be kept. I want a safety net that works, plus freedom so that people can get on and live their lives. And what the Prime Minister's talking about is that spirit of freedom. I mean, she doesn't care about 2-for-1 offers. Hallelujah. People are going to have the space to be responsible, make their own choices and build their own lives. And of course, responsibility and freedom is quite risky, but it is the essence of being human. And that's why I'm so excited about the speech she's made today. If only Tory MPs would get behind her, we could do something great.
So that was Steve Baker, and we were putting him on the spot too with moving on up by M People, which M People are rather annoyed was used at that conference. I mean, they do have the rights if they pay the music dues to have whatever they want, but it's sort of backfired on them a little bit.
Yes, because the founder of MP Pool, Mike Pickering, was apparently livid, and he suggested that they look at the lyrics, "Go and pack your bags and get out," which was not the line that Liz Truss would obviously have chosen it for the line, "Moving on up, nothing can stop us." And of course, the MP Pool's lead singer, her son is a Labour councillor.
Yeah, and they have been left-leaning. They'll acknowledge that, I think,
Yes,
MP.
yes,
yeah.
absolutely. So even that was coming for criticism. But I think really, not only does she have to reach out to the public if she's going to overturn these horrendous, for the Tory party, leads for Labour of sort of 30%, she's got to reach out to her own party, because she will only be able to get through.
Got conference cold, I'm sorry.
Gloria.
It's just come on. I wanted to ask you, because when we saw Steve Baker there, we spoke to Brendan Clark-Smith earlier. There's a clear attempt by her supporters to get on the media today and, stand by her and defend her. Jake Berry, for example, the Conservative Party chairman, saying she is the Conservative Party's greatest asset. Was that a defence too far?
Well, they thought Boris Johnson was their greatest asset only a year ago. I mean, they were talking about him having 10 years in power, and look where that went. Noticeably, Chloe Smith was asked very shortly after that, she's Secretary of State for Work and Pensions, of course, if indeed Liz Truss was the Conservative Party's greatest asset. She was asked more than once, and she failed to answer that question. Clearly, there will be an attempt to try to rally round to make support seem to be that, she's OK. But it's difficult because she's unfortunately now in a position that whatever she does, she's going to upset people. So she backtracked on the 45p tax cut. Lots of people are now very upset. Well, why didn't you stick to your guns? You were supposed to be strong. You were supposed to be not for turning. So people are upset about that. She's upset lots of people because she does want and believe that you're going to go for growth by cutting taxes. But of course, if you're going to cut taxes, that's got to be paid for. How do you pay for it? She had said she wasn't looking to cut public spending, but it sounds like that is definitely going to change. And where are the cuts going to come?
They can't come on the front line, can they? They can't, what we know is schools and hospitals, policing. Those things are going to be a potential battle line with her MPs.
Yeah, and I mean, they're boosting defence spending. She made great play of, obviously, support for Ukraine, on which the Conservative Party have been very strong. That's been boosted 3%. What else is going to cut? And, of course, inflation at 10%. If you don't uprate with inflation, that's a cut.
It's a cut.
Real cut. Catherine, as ever, thank you for that. Well, let's further discuss the financial implications and get some reaction to the speech. David Page joining us now, head of macro research at AQA Investment. David, thanks for your time. I think I'm probably right in saying no more spooking of the markets at the moment. They're sort of pricing a lot of this stuff in because no new announcements, no rabbits out of the hat. But we are understanding that the Chancellor will meet High Street bank executives tomorrow.
Yeah, so, I mean, that's the first test passed, really, from her perspective. We got through this. Sterling didn't fall back any further. Yields didn't collapse. So, I mean, given the context of the last 10 days, that's a definite tick in her box. But, yeah, I mean, primarily that was because we heard nothing new, no mistakes made, but nothing new, no substance, really, to the growth plans that were set out. But, we're no further back, so that's a good start.
And how does she maintain what you describe as a tick in the box? How does she maintain your approval or the approval of the markets?
Well, I think it's one of the things that she focused on, and this is absolutely fundamental, is fiscal discipline. And that's what the market's been most spooked about. Over the last 3 weeks, we've had the announcement of upwards of 300 billions worth of giveaways, with no talk about how that's going to be financed. So now we're hearing that it is going to be financed, that a cast iron grip on fiscal discipline is going to come through. So all of that's very important, very encouraging, but we need to see some backup for that. So we've heard sort of some of the headlines. We now need to know specifically what's going to come through. And as you say, it's not going to be easy. She's ruled out, obviously, a lot of the tax changes that would normally provide that. In the speech, she talked about a 3% increase in defence spending, but she also talked about how much there was going to be to address the health spending backdrop, education, policing. All of these measures cost a lot of money, and what she's asking for isn't going to be easy to deliver without that money. So it's not easy to see how the departmental spending comes through. And we already know there's a lot of tension in the Tory party with regards to not upgrading benefits in line with the very high levels of inflation and worsening that cost of living crisis. So we're going to quickly move into now, how are you going to pay for some of these measures? And that's what the medium-term fiscal plan is meant to be about. Now, we're not too sure on when that is. For some time, they've been talking about, they've brought it forwards to November the 23rd, in line with the Office for Budget Responsibility's commitment as well. There was what looked like briefing over the last couple of days that it might be brought forward a little bit further to October. The Chancellor yesterday, I believe, on your show, said that actually that was still going to be in November. So a little bit of uncertainty there. But markets, I think, really start to need to see some of that fundamental behind it. Of course, at the moment, the Bank of England is still providing a backstop for the market, and that will be the case until the end of next week. But I think we need certainty of when it's going to be, when we'll hear about this fiscal discipline going from there.
And just to talk about this growth that the Prime Minister is going on about, I mean, that's going to take time to actually get through the economy. And as we're indicating, a lot of people looking at their mortgage rates and interest rates and inflation. And we've got, as I said, this meeting tomorrow with the Treasury insisting it's not been specially arranged. But I just wonder what will be said across the table.
Yeah, who knows? I mean, the growth mantra, I guess, is, it's absolutely right for the government to be focused on growth. And that is what, every government should be focused on, rebuilding potential supply growth in the economy. It's just not obvious that what we have here is plans for growth rather than hopes for growth. Nothing that's really been announced is going to materially shift the growth backdrop. Certainly the tax giveaways are unlikely to materially boost supply growth. In normal times, they would have boosted demand growth. But of course, this is a time where we're already seeing elevated inflation, and the Bank of England is trying to rein in that excess demand growth to restore price stability. So the demand growth is likely to force the Bank of England into tighter monetary policy, into increase in interest rates, which slows headline growth. And there's very little that's going to fundamentally move the needle on supply growth. So the government's got the right idea in terms of what they need to achieve. It's just not obvious to us at AXA investment managers or indeed to many in markets that they're delivering plans that are actually going to give you that.
During the period of market volatility, we had people saying, you know what, you can't make policy. Elected politicians cannot make policy on the basis of city traders. They have to make policy, which they're elected politicians who make policy in line with what they think is best for the people of this country. I'm sure you will say why that assessment is wrong, but just explain it to us. Explain why you would say that.
I've just tested it. That's definitely not on. I don't know what else.
Sorry, is there anything else coming through there?
Is there anything? I mean, I've been using it. No.
The time, I'm sure.
Voice is off. Apologies for that. Everyone else wanted to know his opinion on it as well. So, and who can blame them? Coming up, Russia under fire in Ukraine. We'll be speaking to the mayor of Kiev, Vitaly Klitschko. Yes, the champion boxer on the fight back of Ukraine. But let's take a look at the weather for you now.
Hello again, I'm Aidan McKibben from the Met Office. An area of rain moves east, accompanied by strong winds. Brighter skies follow, but further showers for many areas, particularly towards the northwest.
No, I checked
low pressure
it.
in charge at the moment. That low pressure sitting towards Iceland, and a weather front is currently crossing the country. Now that's containing some persistent rain, a lot of cloud as well, and it's accompanied by gusty winds as it pushes into the Midlands, southern parts of England, East Anglia and the southeast by the afternoon. It does brighten up towards the north and the west, but a fair number of showers following and some more persistent rain at times for the likes of northern England and southwest Scotland. Feeling fresher behind the front, but actually it's relatively mild ahead of it. Temperatures falling away as that front crosses the country because it is a cold front. It's introducing cooler air. As we head into the evening then, clearer skies follow that area of rain. And actually for much of England and Wales, it is a largely clear and dry night. The winds starting to ease, and in some sheltered spots, it's going to turn chillier compared with the last couple of nights. Temperatures into the mid or even low single figures. But for Scotland, for the far north of England and for Northern Ireland, it stays showery overnight, it stays breezy as well, and those showers continue during Thursday morning. There'll be further showers pushing into North Wales and North West England, perhaps some more persistent rain at times as well. Towards the south and the southeast, it stays largely dry with some sunny spells and feeling warm in that sunshine, 19 Celsius, but cooler further northwest where we've got those showers coming in and that gusty wind as well. Some more persistent rain affecting southern Scotland, northern England for a time later Thursday, and some very lively rainfall pushing into the northwest of Scotland, accompanied by rather gusty winds as well by the end of the day. The weather stays very changeable on Friday with rain and showers in many places, a little drier for many as we start the weekend.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB Newsday with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria De Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around. With all the biggest topics and guests, you will always be up to date. GB Newsday and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
So, welcome back. Russia's President Vladimir Putin announcing formally last week that he was annexing 4 regions of Ukraine. He's actually now signed the documents to put that into practice.
However, the Ukraine is still making strong advances and forces are currently taking back key areas in Kherson, Kharkiv and Donetsk.
Well, video footage from Russia showing a convoy of vehicles on a train belonging to a Russian military unit that handles nuclear weapons heading towards Ukraine, causing, of course, some alarm. Then in the last few hours, the Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov pledging to retake those annexed areas, saying they will be with Russia forever.
Joining us on the show now is Vitaly Klitschko, who is the mayor of Kiev. Great to see you. Looking at some recent comments that you made in the last few days, you say Ukrainians feel safer than they did earlier in the war. Just explain why and how that is.
First of all, I want to use the moment and tell thank you very much for Great Britain, for Great Britain government to support Ukraine. We need support of our friends, and because we're fighting and defending not our independence, not our houses and families. We're fighting right now for the same values, democratic values in Ukraine, in Europe, and it's very important right now to support Ukraine. First point. The second point regarding your question, right now we feel much more safety than a couple of months ago. We received more modern weapons, anti-rocket system, which make the life of our citizens much quieter, much safer. It's very important for us, for Ukrainians. And also we very happy Ukrainian warriors have very good progress in east and south of Ukraine and move back a couple of cities and villages in east of Ukraine, and it's very good. We make our finger crossed for our patriots, for our warriors who defending our territorial integrity.
As you say, Vitaly, clearly along the Dnipro River in particular, you're making huge advances and gaining ground there. What's your analysis? Is it that some of those Russian units really haven't got any fight left in them? They're giving up, as well as obviously all this arms and expertise you're being given from the West?
We very appreciate for West for help what we receive. I already told that it's very important to receive humanitarian help. It's very important to receive financial support for Ukraine. It's very important to receive defensive weapons. I want to say defensive weapon because we defend our country. And Putin announced the new territory what Russian Federation have already. My simple explanation: Putin tried to legalize his illegal activities, and it was Ukraine and still Ukraine. It's our territory, and please don't forget. I want to remind, 1996, Ukraine was third country in the world with nuclear weapons. We give up our nuclear weapons for the guarantee our independence and territorial integrity. Great Britain, United States, and also Russian Federation gives this guarantee. But Russians break right now all rules, international agreements, and right now to try to occupy our territory. And we fighting, defending our homes, we defending future for our children, and we are very good motivated in this war because it's our home. We defend our country, we defend our future, we defend the same values what we have.
Do you and others there in Kiev, though, seriously believe that he may press that nuclear button, even if they're small, as they say, tactical nuclear weapons?
Yes, of course. Everyone is worried about announcement from Russians. They tell they're ready to use nuclear weapons. It will be not local conflict. It will be local war between Ukraine and Russia. It will be the global war, because if Russians use nuclear weapons, this war can touch personally everyone in our planet, and that's why we worry very much about that. And I hope the Russians think 10 times before they use that. First point, and second point, its whole world will be involved in this war, because it's dangerous for whole world what Russian want to bring.
Russian president said this morning he was meeting with teachers. He referred to the four partly Russian-controlled Ukrainian regions that he declared Russian territory on Friday. He said he expected the situation in those regions to stabilise. What's your reaction to that?
To stabilise, first of all, he's destroyed whole situation, destroyed the lives of millions of people, not just in Ukraine, also in Europe. It is big tragedy for millions. Please don't forget, in Ukraine we have around 10 million refugees, which the people left, and right now they doesn't have his apartments, their houses, and they try to build his life from zero. And it's big disaster, big tragedy for Ukraine, for many European countries. But please don't forget, it's big tragedy also for Russian Federation. I'm more than sure it's pretty soon the Russian citizens ask the Russian government, ask Putin why world companies like IBM, SAP, IKEA, world brands as Coca-Cola, McDonald's, 1,000 in other countries left Russia. And Iron Curtain coming back. It's Russians not allowed to travel around the world. And also main questions what have to give the Russian population to Putin. For which reason? Why died my husband, my brother, my relatives? Which reason? Why they died? And please don't forget, right now it's around 60,000 Russian soldiers already died. It's more than in war in Afghanistan. It's war more than war in Chechnya. It's altogether it's big numbers. And it's also a big tragedy for Russian Federation.
Vitaly Klitschko, Mayor of Kiev, thank you very much indeed. And your latest fight, of course, a fight for survival. Thanks very much indeed.
Time is 2:35. After the break, we'll have the latest on the rail strikes, which has seen 9,000 drivers walking out, and the Prime Minister speaking out against what she has described as militant unions. First at your news update.
A very good afternoon. 2:35. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date. Protesters disrupted the Prime Minister's first Conservative Party conference speech as leader.
Let's get them removed.
That was Liz Truss saying, "Let's get them removed," speaking about those two Greenpeace demonstrators who were then quickly escorted from the hall after waving a flag which said, "Who voted for this?" Conservative members responded by applauding Liz Truss to show their support. Well, she then went on to reassure the party that both she and the Chancellor are in complete lockstep with each other on their plan to get the economy growing.
Growth means more money in people's pockets. It means businesses creating new jobs. Growth means people can feel secure and they can plan for their future. Fundamentally, growth helps people fulfil their hopes and their dreams. And that's why our dynamic new Chancellor and I will be taking action in 3 areas.
Irishman Rory Mason has been killed while fighting for Ukraine's International Legion near the Russian border. The 23-year-old's father said his family's enormously proud of his courage, determination and selflessness by enlisting to support Ukraine. More travel disruption today for rail passengers. ASLEF and the TSSA union members are striking again over pay, jobs and conditions. That's had an impact on services across the country. The ASLEF General Secretary Mick Whelan says the industrial action will continue until the government intervenes. We're on your TV, online and DAB+ radio. It's GB News. Don't go anywhere. Newsday will be back in a moment.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB Newsday with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria De Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around. With all the biggest topics and guests, you will always be up to date. GB Newsday and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me! And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Well, the Prime Minister included the trade unions in a stinging attack on what she called an anti-growth coalition in her speech today, which she said was determined to hold Britain back.
Well, this comes as thousands of workers from the train drivers' union ASLEF and the Transport Salary Staffs Association walked out again today, all in this ongoing dispute over pay, pensions and conditions in the industry.
The RMT chief, Mick Lynch, has responded to the Prime Minister by calling on her to stop maligning trade unions. He said, "It's barking mad."
Well, who in this society is opposed to growth, added, and I think actually that was from ASLEF as well, both unions reacting to what the Prime Minister had to say. Let's get reaction, though, from across the country in the middle of the strike. Our West Midlands reporter Jack Carson is at Birmingham New Street Station. Our Yorkshire and Humber reporter Anna Riley up at Leeds for us. Let's head to Jack first, of course, because everyone trying to get away from the Tory party conference just by coincidence.
Yes, so for Tory party conference, people that have been there and also commuters and students that usually use the trains here, there are no services here from New Street today, from Avanti West Coast cross country to West Midlands Railway and beyond. And I'm joined with somebody that usually takes the train, a commuter here today, Dean, and Dean has had to actually cycle all the way into town today to do his jobs because the trains have been on strike. Tell me about your experience today.
Went to the train station, found out the trains were cancelled. There weren't no trains at all. I was meant to be going to Stoke today to visit a friend. That ain't gonna happen now, is it? But yeah, I've cycled all the way from lovely Lee Hall, all the way to Bourneville. Got caught in that torrential rain on the way back. Took some cover. But strike should be what? 1 day a week? Not 3 days.
So you're annoyed at the level of disruption. Obviously, we had the strikes on Saturday. This coming Saturday, we've got more strikes as well, and you're annoyed at the
people that have got to go on strikes. You know, you obviously want more out of what your job is, but 3 days is a bit too much, especially in Birmingham. Everything's going to be affected.
And what kind of solutions do you have? What way? I know you're not a politician, but what way do you think could help resolve this dispute?
I wouldn't have a clue, boss. Honest. I know the bus company have got to be living it now because they're still running.
Okay, well, of course, along with commuters like Dean, Tory party conference delegates can't also get away from conference. They're having to make alternative travel arrangements as well. When the strike was called, Mick Lynch, the General Secretary of ASLEF, said the strike was only being called and they were only disputing those companies that hadn't offered their train drivers any pay increase since 2019. The Rail Delivery Group, which is part of National Rail, has tweeted this morning that they want progress, not strikes, and they kind of argued against this disruption this morning. But speaking to that commuter and other commuters, there is disruption here at New Street today because of the industrial action.
Jack, thank you for bringing us the picture in Birmingham. Let's cross now to Anna to get the latest in Leeds.
Good afternoon. Yes, here at Leeds train station there's been an ASLEF picket line. That's the train drivers union with over 21,000 members. Their main dispute is over pay and wanting a pay increase that goes in line with inflation to keep up with the cost of living. I'm joined now by Nigel Roebuck. He is the district officer for ASLEF. Thank you for speaking to us, Nigel. We've heard from Liz Truss this afternoon. She's called unions militist, and she said militant, and she said that they are, she's criticised them. What do you think to the comments that she's made?
Well, I have heard myself that there's some new soundbite, anti-growth coalition or something. I'm not overly sure what that's got to do with striking train drivers, but it's just another soundbite. And what we are hearing a lot in this industry is soundbites from people saying we need to get round the table and sort this dispute out. Well, we need to move on from the soundbites and actually get round the table, release the companies to do the talks with the trade unions, and let's get our members a pay rise.
And she said that unions are enemies of enterprise as well. What's your take on that?
As I say, it's absolutely nothing to do with the dispute we've got today. She's entitled to say what she wants to say because she's the Prime Minister at the end of the day. This is about working people that need a pay rise, that haven't had a pay rise for 3 years, that are seeing their wages stagnate and go backwards in real terms. 2 years we didn't take a pay rise through a pandemic where these people worked on the front line, took the risk back to the family. We're now in year 3, no pay rise. We need to move forward and get the money into our people's wages.
What would you say, though, to people who say train drivers are on a really good wage? It's an average of £51,000 that they get a year. They get paid a lot more than public sector workers. What would you say to that?
Well, it's the going rate for the job. At the end of the day, that is the rate for the job. That's the market. And at the end of the day, whether it's not a race to the bottom. And at the end of the day, our people, their cost of living, their bills, their interest rates are going up, same as everybody else's, their mortgages, and at the end of the day, regardless of the salary, it's not about saying, well, because you're on a high salary, you can have a lower percent pay rise, because that doesn't necessarily mean that the lowest paid in society that probably deserve the pay rise even more are going to get a higher pay rise. It's not a race to the bottom. It's about working people, standing together with working people in a cost of living crisis.
These strikes have been going on since the summer. Obviously, passengers are tremendously inconvenienced. People can't get to work. People can't go about their daily lives. What kind of response have you been getting from the public, and what would you say to them?
Well, first of all, let's be clear. Nobody wants to take strike action. We're not a trade union that takes strike action. Most of the members that have been on strike today, you've just seen in big numbers here today. It's been over 20 years since we took strike action. Unfortunately, people will be inconvenienced, but I think in general the support from the public has been really good, because they understand that it's working people standing with working people, and the majority of people that commute on the trains are working people. They're obviously struggling in a cost of living crisis too, so there is that level of understanding, absolutely.
Thank you, Nigel. Thank you for sharing with us there. So that's the views of Nigel Roebuck, the district officer for ASLEF, there on his take on the strikes and why they're happening.
Anna, thank you. Thanks very much for bringing us the picture from Leeds.
Well, what about the bigger picture? To discuss the impact of what's happening and yet to come down the line, we're joined once more by Alan Jones, industrial correspondent at Press Association. Alan, good to speak to you again. A change of Transport Secretary, of course, and maybe a change of mood music. Just looking at what Mick Whelan's saying from ASLEF, a different mood, a different take, but a bit too early to say if it will lead to progress in the dispute.
Yeah, I mean, there's very little sign that the government's changing its position. You're right. The previous Transport Secretary, Grant Shapps, refused to meet the unions at all. Anne-Marie Trevelyan, the new Transport Secretary, has met them. Apparently, she stood outside her office door and shook hands as they arrived in the Transport Department. But once that meeting was over, she shut the door. And the door still seems to be shut on these negotiations as far as the government are concerned. And I think it's pretty clear now, certainly the unions are clear, unless the government start to get properly involved in these negotiations, these strikes will just continue. And there are some people in rail unions now who are talking privately about these strikes going into the new year, not just on Saturday and next week. We're talking about strikes continuing into New Year. Today's the 10th national rail strike. Next week will be the 11th. And so it's already one of the longest running rail disputes in living memory. And if this goes on into next year, it could end up being the longest one ever.
But this is bad not just for passengers, it's bad for the government, it's bad for the unions. Where do you see any possible compromise? Is it possible to even dream that there could be a compromise?
I mean, every dispute is settled and everyone has to compromise. You know, this dispute will eventually be settled and there'll have to be compromise, you know. But we're at the stage now where it is so deadlocked. It's going to take quite a big move. You know, either the train companies will have to make a proper formal offer to the unions without any strings attached, or the unions will have to say, OK, we'll accept these changes to working practices, we'll accept some ticket offices will have to close, or the government will have to get involved, you know. And I mean, I think it's increasingly obvious that the government are just going to have to get involved. Otherwise, there are meetings going on, you know, between the employers and the unions. There was a meeting last week. There's one this week. There's another one planned for next week. But there's so little progress being made. It's, you know, it's at the stage where it's hardly worth them meeting each other without some kind of government involvement.
Problem, Alan, it is so complex in that obviously ASLEF, as we understand, are just after the pay rise, not having had one, they say, for 2 years. But for the RMT and the TSSA and others, it's about removing ticket offices, it's about staffing and productivity and so on.
Yeah, there are separate disputes. You're right. The ASLEF, the train drivers dispute, is purely about pay. There's no suggestion that anybody wants to cut back on the number of train drivers. ASLEF say this is the third year without a pay rise. So, you know, yes, they are well paid, but, you know, that's a totally different argument. Whereas you're right, the RMT and the TSSA, they're embroiled in this dispute about changing their terms and conditions, having different opening times for ticket offices, not having many ticket offices, having staff on concourses, changing the way maintenance crews get to work, the way they operate, you know, fiercely complicated, difficult and potentially quite dangerous things that are being discussed. So, you know, it is incredibly difficult to see an easy way out of this. There are so many different disputes, there are so many different aspects to it, and it's been going on for so long. The longer it goes on, the longer inflation keeps getting up. You know, there is no way these disputes are going to be settled anytime soon.
Keeps an industrial correspondent busy, though. Alan, for the moment, thanks very much indeed for your time. Cheers. Thank you.
Now, let's return to the Prime Minister's speech at Conservative Party conference this morning. Did she display strong body language or did she show a lack of power following a difficult week? Well, here to tell us, to analyse, is a body language expert, Judy James. Judy, what signs did you spot? What did they tell us? What did her body language tell us about her how she's feeling?
Well, overall, her performance was better, which is not a huge compliment. She's not a naturally good speaker. I think she created what I call a breathing space performance rather than a deeply inspirational performance. So what we're looking at from a leader is what's called the science of sensation. It's how you feel in the audience at the end. What we got were a lot of these gestures. Now, this one here is called the empty embrace. And it implied a certain anxiety that she's not getting everybody on board. It was an invitation to get everybody to join in with her thinking, let's all get together on this, which you can obviously understand. Where she started to do what I call self-heckling rituals was here you can see she talks tough, but she begins to pull her arms down to her torso. So a lot of her gesticulation involved arms clamped to the torso in what we call a self-hug, which usually implies an inner lack of confidence. And her gesticulation was coming from the elbow down, the hands were out like that, with very spiked fingers that look rather tense. So that was incongruent with her verbal message. She needs to actually beef that one up a little bit so that she's not heckling herself when she's talking tough. She's still, unfortunately, not doing what I call precision rituals. A lot of what we had, again, when she wasn't doing the empty embrace, she was doing what I call the invisible brick gesticulation, which is where she holds her hands apart as though she's carrying an invisible brick. That's fine when you're discussing a problem that you've got. But at the end of it, from a leader, from a Prime Minister, you would expect to see a gesture that suggests good, solid solutions, and that would be a precision gesture. It's usually a small touching together of the index finger and the thumb. It shouldn't be too exaggerated, but that should imply, I understand the problems, but I'm also absolutely costed out and 100% sure of the solutions from those problems. So the incongruence wasn't working very well. She also used a lot of visual and verbal cliches. She's still tending to channel Thatcher. And I would always coach somebody to try and be themselves, to bring out their own charisma rather than copying somebody else. She used a lot of verbal techniques, clusters of 3 points. That's got whiskers on it. It's such an old technique. Growth, growth, growth. Ukraine can win, must win, will win. It always gets applause, but it's a really old-fashioned technique. And out came the other antique gesture, which is Tony Blair's thumb of power. That one came out of the cupboard as well. Having said that, there were moments, and she built, I actually think that the heckling in the audience brought out strength in her performance. She was quite robotic and nervous before that. She kind of gained in strength. I think the applause that it got helped her a lot. And that's when she became a little bit more human, less robotic. I like the way that she was referring to her team. I know we know that there might be problems there, but there was a lot of fondness when she spoke to Denise Kofi. There were a lot of smiles. She did a sort of double point. And that would be the confident, charismatic version of her. I hope she can build on.
Judy, really interesting, and politicians who are watching will be really sad to hear you saying that the list of things in threes is old-fashioned. They all do it, but thank you for giving us that take.
Thank you.
Liz Truss with whiskers on. Now, there's a thought. Let's end the programme with Champions League games last night. Liverpool overcoming Rangers 2-0. Spurs, a disappointing night away to Frankfurt, a 0-0 draw. This evening, 3 British teams, Chelsea, Man City and Celtic, all in action. Let's speak to sports journalist Ben Jacobs joining us. Ben, thanks very much for your time. Settling the nerves, at least for Liverpool, with Klopp. Hello, Ben, can you hear us?
Yes, now I can hear you.
Okay. I was just saying, obviously that result for Liverpool settling the nerves a little bit for Klopp, because there'd been 1 or 2 problems, particularly when they met with Brighton, of course. A lot of Liverpool supporters in Anfield thinking, are we in trouble?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that Jurgen Klopp said after that 2-0 victory over the Rangers that it had very much calmed the nerves. And for Trent Alexander-Arnold in particular, who scored the opening goal, it was much needed, both for Liverpool and England as well, because he shows his value, at least as far as his attack-minded play is concerned. And then Mo Salah scoring from the penalty spot. It feels ages since he's got on the score sheet, even though Liverpool in some games, like against Bournemouth in the Premier League, have scored quite a few. And towards the end of the game, Rangers had a few chances that Jurgen Klopp would not have been happy about, but ultimately it's a win that Liverpool needed. It's a clean sheet. It's 2 players on the score sheet that have got confidence-boosted goals. So all around, no complaints as far as Liverpool are concerned. They really needed that victory, as you say.
Now, what about Trent Alexander-Arnold? Because, of course, lots of questions about Gareth Southgate and England preparing for that World Cup. Is he back in contention for the England side?
Well, I think you can look at it 2 ways. We know that Trent Alexander can do that. It was a majestic free kick, but what about his defensive qualities? And if he plays for England, is he going to be a liability in that position? And Gareth Southgate can watch him score free kicks all day long, but can he do it defensively? And there are still question marks, but it's certainly interesting over the course of the last few days. We've seen Trent Alexander-Arnold put on a masterclass as far as going forward and scoring that free kick. And we've also seen James Maddison scoring for fun and getting assists for Leicester City, and a great free kick from Maddison against Nottingham Forest as well on Monday night in the Premier League. And those 2 players at the moment are both seemingly out in the cold. So Gareth Southgate has got some selection headaches, but it remains to be seen whether Trent Alexander-Arnold doing things well going forwards is enough to change Gareth Southgate's mind, because still he has to show that he can be resilient at the other end of the field.
Yeah, defending as well. More action with the Giants in operation tonight. Man City, Chelsea, Glasgow, Celtic. Not Rangers, of course. They were in the previous tie-up with Liverpool. But it's interesting for Chelsea, of course. Graham Potter, new boss, having come from Brighton. Not that much experience of European football.
Yeah, and they come off the back of a 1-1 draw against Salzburg, and they lost their opening game in Croatia as well. So this is now a must-win game for Chelsea, because then they have the reverse fixture. So if they don't get maximum points at Stamford Bridge against Milan, then they've got to go away at the San Siro, and that's going to be very tricky suddenly for them to go through. Interesting as well, the debate around who starts in goal, because Graham Potter seemingly has given the number 1 to Kepa as opposed to Edouard Mendy, who was Thomas Tuchel's preference. And then Celtic are away at Leipzig off the back of drawing with Shakhtar Donetsk, and Manchester City scoring goals and winning for fun. They should easily and comfortably beat Copenhagen. And is Erling Haaland going to get another hat-trick, which would be 4 hat-tricks in a row at home, which is an astonishing stat if it happens.
4 hat-tricks in a row, is that a 12er? I'm not so sure. Anyway, thank you very much indeed for your expert analysis, and look forward to those games tonight.
Thank you.
You enjoyed that, didn't you?
I loved it. I was hanging off your every word. That was my shopping list.
Oh, right, OK.
Thank you for watching GB Newsday. Of course, stay with the channel, because up next is Patrick Christie's with more stories making headlines across the UK, including crossing over to Florida to watch the launch of a NASA rocket.
Oh, let's take a short break first, then.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB Newsday with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria De Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christie's. I'm not here to mess around. With all the biggest topics and guests, you will always be up to date. GB Newsday and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
This is GB News Live with me, Patrick Christie's, bringing you the latest from a day that's seen Truss talk, protesters pounce, and Tories tantrum as well. We've got all of the latest, mixed in with a lot of strong opinion as well, and we're even going live to the trial of one of the most controversial men on the planet, Alex Jones. But coming up, Prime Minister Liz Truss said the word growth more times than an overworked dermatologist during her keynote speech at the Conservative Party conference in Birmingham. She wants to get Britain moving. She entered the conference hall to the song Moving On Up by M People, who are apparently livid that she used it. What song would you have chosen for Liz Truss? GB Views at gbnews.uk. What tune should Truss have used? She was also heckled by Greenpeace before they were lifted and then turfed out. You love to see it. There's lots of Tory tantrums, lots of infighting. I went out and asked the public if they thought the Tories were still electable, and one student thought that Jeremy Corbyn was still in charge of the Labour Party. So the future of this country is, well, let's be honest, screwed. Also, this hour, Suella Braverman's police pledge. As the Home Secretary announces, a police officer will go to every single burglary in England and Wales. How quickly they get there remains to be seen, but we'll have to figure that one out. And the announcement came during Suella Braverman's speech in Birmingham yesterday, where she also called for police to stop virtue signalling and to be more PCs, less PC. No more Macarenas at Pride, then.